Chapter 390. Unless it was absolutely necessary, cultivators from the same camp would not challenge each other, as it would be easy for the opposing cultivators to take advantage of the situation. Lu Yi chose to challenge the guy ranked 99th, but the information he received from the mark surprised him. That person was currently being challenged. Naturally, one person could not accept two challenges at the same time. If Lu Yi really wanted to challenge that person, he would have to finish his battle first. He changed his target to the one ranked 98th, who was also being challenged. The last three people on the spirit stream list seemed to be quite busy. From the looks of it, if one did not have enough strength to reach the top of the list, even if they were lucky enough to enter the spirit stream list, they would quickly be beaten down. Just as Lu Yi was about to wait, the 100th name on the spirit stream list suddenly distorted and disappeared. Then, another person's name appeared on it. The original 100th name had been replaced. Lu Yi quickly checked the camp of the new person on the list, and after confirming that he was from the Myriad Devil Ridge, he immediately issued a challenge. This time, there was no information that the person was being challenged. Not long after, that person accepted the challenge. If he did not accept, Lu Yi would replace him. His opponent had just challenged someone else and entered the spirit stream list, so he would definitely need some time to recover. Therefore, although he accepted the challenge, the battle did not immediately begin. Since he had nothing to do, Lu Yi swallowed some spirit pills to cultivate while letting the talent tree continue to devour the earth core fire. At the same time, he divided his attention to study the spirit stream list. His understanding of the spirit stream list was based on hearsay. Although he had reached the 33rd position in the past, it had only taken him 3 days to get off the list. Therefore, he wasn't too clear on the details of the list. Time flew by and 2 hours passed. The battlefield mark received a message, and Lu Yi immediately stopped what he was doing and prepared for battle. Suddenly, a heavenly secret descended and enveloped him. The space around Lu Yi began to distort, and his vision changed as a large amount of white light filled his vision. When the white light dissipated, he suddenly saw a figure not far away. It was a man in his early 20s, who should be the target of this challenge. A strange sound came from beside him. Lu Yi turned his head and saw Hu Pu and Yi standing beside him. They were looking around curiously. One of them was sleeping while the other was cultivating. It was unknown how they had suddenly appeared here. Lu Yi, what is this place? Yi asked. Let's talk later. Lu Yi turned to look at the other side. The Myriad Demons Ridge cultivators had shocked expressions on their faces. They looked at Lu Yi and Yi, then at Hu Pu. No matter how hard they racked their brains, they couldn't understand how a one-on-one duel had turned into a group fight. During the Spirit Stream List challenge, it was understandable that a cultivator would bring along a pet that had formed a pet contract with them. There were cultivators from the beast taming school on the Spirit Stream List, and they had more than one pet beast with them. But to have two enemies involved at the same time was a bit ridiculous. Just as he was about to ask about the situation, he suddenly noticed that Lu Ye's appearance was very familiar. Taking a closer look, wasn't this the guy their camp had been searching for all this time? Other than the Leaf Alliance, a large number of cultivators were still searching for him in the area where he had disappeared. However, this fellow had actually come to challenge the Spirit Stream List. Lu Ye! The Myriad Demons Ridge cultivator shouted in a low voice. For a moment, he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. A moving treasure trove had appeared in front of him out of nowhere. If he could kill him here, then all the benefits would be his. However, this fellow's strength was astonishing. Although he had barely made it onto the Spirit Stream List, he didn't have the confidence to win this battle. As soon as he finished speaking, Lu Yi had already rushed towards him. The Myriad Demons Ridge cultivator cursed inwardly. Because he was a weapon cultivator, he had deliberately chosen a very small space when choosing the location of the battle. There was nothing in this space except for a fighting stage with a radius of a few dozen meters. Such a small space was undoubtedly very suitable for a weapon cultivator to display their strength. However, Lu Yi was also a weapon cultivator. In such an environment, both sides would be able to gain the same advantage. With the support of Windwalk, his figure became light and graceful, leaving behind afterimages as he closed the distance of a few dozen meters between them. This speed, the Myriad Demon's Ridge cultivator's eyes twitched. He raised his hand and summoned his spiritual weapon. Although he knew that he was no match for Lu Yi, he was still a cultivator on the spirit stream list. No matter what, he still needed to exchange a few blows to get a feel for Lu Yi's strength. Whooshing sounds could be heard as Lu Yi charged forward. 9 streams of light shot out from the weapon box, forming a straight line that seemed to chase after the stars and moon. The Myriad Demon's Ridge cultivator had long since heard of Lu Yi's ability to control spiritual weapons. He immediately took out a golden body talisman and slapped it onto his body, urging all of his spiritual power to protect himself. Roar! A heaven-shaking tiger roar could be heard, and a visible shockwave swept towards the Myriad Demon's Ridge cultivator. When the shockwave hit him, he felt as if someone had smashed him in the head with a hammer. His head hurt and he saw stars. His spiritual power seemed to dissipate for a moment. He was greatly shocked. Lu Yi's white tiger actually had such divine power? Just as he steadied his mind, a barrage of magical techniques flew towards him from the side. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw the girl who had come in with Lu Yi. Her spiritual power surged, and one magical technique after another rapidly formed, shooting towards him as if they were free. Her casting speed was incredibly fast, and there were many types of magical technique. It was a dazzling sight. Rumbling sounds could be heard as one magical technique after another fell. Even though the Myriad Demon's Ridge cultivator did his best to dodge, he was still hit. The golden light on his body dimmed at a visible rate. A great sense of crisis welled up in his heart. He hurriedly opened his mouth. Before he could say the last word, the flying Imperial equipment had already broken through his golden body talisman and protective spiritual energy. It tore through the armor he was wearing and brought out a string of blood from his body. The powerful impact forced that person back again and again, causing him to shake violently. Lu Yi rushed in front of him and unsheathed his coiling mountain blade. He raised his hand and slashed down. As he passed by, a huge head flew into the sky. Blood spurted out from the headless neck, causing a rain of blood to fall. Several meters away, Lu Yi shook off the bloodstains on his coiling mountain blade and sheathed it. So weak. Ever since he had reached the 7th heaven and entered the core region, he had killed many 9th heaven cultivators. However, this was the first time he had killed a 9th heaven cultivator of the spirit stream list. The feeling he got from his opponent was that he was very weak, unable to withstand a single blow. Although Hu Po and Yi had participated in this battle, the level of his opponent's performance had disappointed Lu Yi. Ever since he had entered the core region, Lu Yi had always been besieged. He had never fought one-on-one. The challenge of the spirit stream list was the best opportunity for him. This way, he would be able to test the gap between himself and the other spirit stream list cultivators. Since he had chosen to challenge the spirit stream list, he naturally had to follow his 4th senior brother's instructions and reach the highest position in the shortest time possible. He stepped forward and collected the person's storage pouch and spiritual artifact. Then, she said, Lu Yi, is this the spirit stream list challenge? When she had first appeared, she hadn't been able to react. Only now did she realize what was going on. Lu Yi had not expected that both Yi and Hu Po would be sent here to participate in the challenge. However, strictly speaking, Hu Po was his pet beast. As a weapon cultivator, bringing a pet beast to participate in the challenge of the spirit stream list was reasonable. It was also permitted by Heaven's secret. Yi was also Hu Po's pet beast, so she had naturally followed him. This allowed him to gain a lot of advantages. Let's go out, Lu Yi said. As Heaven's Secret descended, his vision blurred and he returned to the wooden house. He floated in through the window and landed in front of him, sitting down obediently. Hoopa also jumped onto his lap and waited quietly. The two little ones obviously knew that Lu Yi would not give up, and would accompany him to challenge the spirit stream list. Lu Yi once again activated the battlefield imprint and linked it to the spirit stream list. He tried to challenge the 99th rank, but failed. He could only settle for the next best thing, which was the 98th rank. This time, however, he succeeded. What surprised Lu Yi was that his opponent didn't make him wait for too long. After only an hour, Heaven's Secret descended and sent him into a small space. The terrain of the battle this time was similar to the last time. It was a small space with a radius of only a few dozen meters. Cultivators who would choose this kind of space were either weapon cultivators or body cultivators. This was because only cultivators from these two schools would choose this kind of terrain suitable for close combat. For example, magical cultivators or ghost cultivators would definitely choose a terrain with a large area. The white light in his vision dissipated, and Lu Yi immediately looked ahead. He saw a tall and sturdy cultivator across from him. As expected, he was a body cultivator. At that moment, the body cultivator frowned and looked at Lu Yi. Just now, he seemed to have vaguely seen a figure flash by. However, Heaven's Secret's teleportation process would cause a large amount of white light to fill his vision, so he wasn't sure if he had seen wrongly. The figure that had flashed by was naturally Yi. At that moment, she had already hidden herself underground to avoid being discovered. Lu Yi was fighting 2 against 1, which would increase his psychological pressure for no reason. Furthermore, with Yi hidden herself, it would be easier for her to launch a sneak attack at any time. The body cultivator had already activated his spiritual power, and his entire body was brimming with chi and blood. A spirit tool shield hung from his left arm, while his right hand held a spiked mallet. The mallet's surface was covered with sharp barbs. If it smashed into him, he would definitely suffer. The body cultivator raised the shield in front of him and used the spiked mallet to knock on his shield. The sound of his knocking was very clear. He even said, "Come over here, Grand Sky Alliance's little." Before he could finish speaking, he suddenly looked at Lu Yi and said in surprise, "Sect exterminating Yi?" Lu Yi had already rushed towards him. As usual, he used Windwalk to increase his speed. His figure was like lightning, leaving behind afterimages. The distance between them quickly closed. The body cultivator's expression changed slightly, and he inwardly cursed his bad luck. He had fought his way onto the spirit stream list with great difficulty, but now he was being challenged by this star of disaster. It seemed that he wouldn't be able to maintain his 98th position. Chapter 391. As usual, the 9 streaks of light slammed into the spirit artifact shield of the body cultivator one after another. The tremendous impact caused the cultivator's body to tremble violently, and the luster of the spirit artifact shield quickly dimmed. The body cultivator was shocked. He knew very well how strong his spirit artifact shield's defense was, yet it had lost so much of its spirituality in such a short time. It was clear to see how strong the opponent's attack was. After the 9 streaks of light, Lu Yi was already in front of the weapon cultivator. The mountain saber in his hand slashed down like lightning, slashing onto the shield. At the same time, the heavy pressure spirit inscriptions were activated. In an instant, a tremendous pressure descended from the sky. The body cultivator felt as if a mountain was pressing down on his shield. He forced himself not to retreat, but his body shrank and he almost knelt on the ground. He madly circulated his spirit energy, his face flushed red and his muscles bulging. With a furious roar, he pushed the shield forward and smashed down with the hammer in his hand. The streaks of light from the spirit artifact attacked from the side and collided with his hammer, causing it to brush past Lu Ye's body and smash down. The battle arena shook with a boom, and cracks appeared on the ground. Lu Ye's long saber pierced forward, the spirit energy around him boiling. With his celestial 8 cultivation and the support of the double-edged spirit inscriptions, this attack exploded with unimaginable power. The luster of the spirit artifact shield was immediately extinguished, and with a crash, the shield shattered. Seeing the long saber covered in flames slashing down at him, the body cultivator's expression turned to one of horror, and he instinctively wanted to admit defeat. However, at that moment, Hupo, who had been crouching on Lu Ye's shoulder without moving, suddenly opened his mouth and roared. A sound wave visible to the naked eye swept towards the body cultivator. The body cultivator's thoughts were thrown into disarray, and he couldn't shout out the words on the tip of his tongue. The long saber slashed down, and blood splattered everywhere. The body cultivator's burly figure staggered twice before crashing to the ground. His eyes were wide open, and he died with remaining grievances. He knew he wasn't Lu Ye's match, but he was a body cultivator after all. There was always a chance for him to admit defeat, but he didn't expect Hupo to destroy that last chance. Under the soul-sucking tiger roar, he lost his last chance at life. Yi's figure appeared. Finished. Unhappy. She didn't even have time to attack. Tidying up the spoils of war, he left this place under the teleportation of Tianji. After returning to his wooden hut, Lu Yi checked the spirit stream list. He was currently ranked 98th, and could challenge 5 people above him. Therefore, the limit he could challenge was the person ranked 93rd. However, he didn't do that. Instead, he chose to challenge the guy who was ranked 95th. The reason why he didn't challenge the people ranked 96th and 97th was because they were from the Grand Heaven Alliance. Ever since he had entered the core region, the myriad Demon Ridge had been targeting him in all sorts of ways. If not for his strength, he would have died many times over. It was impossible to say that he did not have any resentment. Who didn't have a temper when they were in their prime? Previously, he had killed his way out of the forest of 1,000 poisons because he wanted to buy some array flags as backup. Secondly, he wanted to kill some people from the myriad Devil Ridge to vent his anger. However, it was risky to fight against the entire myriad Devil Ridge by himself. The challenge of the Spirit Stream list was a very good opportunity. This challenge was always a one-on-one battle, so Lu Yi didn't have to worry about being ganged up on. He decided to kill them one by one. He wanted to not see the name of a single myriad Devil's Ridge cultivator wherever he went. Since he was being targeted, he might as well target each other. The cultivator ranked 95th wasn't that busy. Lu Yi issued a challenge, and it was quickly accepted. After Heavenly Secrets sent him to the small space of the battle, Yi hid herself as usual. Hupa crouched on Lu Ye's shoulder. He looked around and found that he was in a large desert. The scorching sun was high in the sky, and the environment was extremely hot. Looking around, he could only see yellow sand dancing in the air. There were no other colors, and he couldn't see the guy ranked 95th. This guy was probably a Dharma cultivator who cultivated a fire or earth-type spell. Lu Yi concluded that, otherwise, he wouldn't have chosen such a terrain. He was too lazy to look for the enemy, so he simply stood there and waited. After a while, Yi sent a message saying that she had found traces of that person. As expected, the other party was indeed a Dharma cultivator. The myriad Devil Ridge's camp was in an uproar. A large number of cultivators from the Yi Alliance searched for traces of the sect exterminating Yi, but they had found nothing so far. No one knew where he was hiding. It was as if he had disappeared into thin air. However, on the Spirit Stream list, the name of the Jade Blood Sect's Lu Yi appeared again. This guy had actually started to challenge the list. At first, only a small number of people knew about this, but the news quickly spread. For a time, countless people paid attention to the Spirit Stream list. They watched as his ranking continued to rise. When they first noticed him, he was only ranked 95th. However, in just half a day, he had risen to 82nd, and in another half a day, he was ranked 73rd. On the second day, he was ranked 65th. The speed at which his ranking rose on the spirit stream list was ridiculously fast, and he didn't seem to have any intention of stopping. If it weren't for the fact that he was often challenged by people who asked him to wait for 4 hours, his ranking would have risen even faster. The waiting time of the challenges greatly delayed his rhythm. What made the myriad Devil Ridge even angrier was that Lu Ye's challenges were one by one. He didn't let go of any of the myriad Devil Ridge cultivators who were ranked higher than him. None of the myriad Devil Ridge cultivators who had fought with him had survived. They were all killed by him. This led to a strange phenomenon. The 20 people ranked lower than him were all from the Grand Heaven Alliance. This was something that was impossible to happen in the past. The myriad Devil Ridge and the Grand Heaven Alliance had produced many talented people. It was basically impossible for 4 or 5 people to be from the same alliance to appear on the Spirit Stream list. However, when Lu Yi started to challenge the list, this unimaginable phenomenon appeared. There was no other reason. All the Myriad Demons Ridge cultivators who were supposed to be in the midst of the Grand Heaven Alliance cultivators were killed. For a time, many Myriad Devil Ridge cultivators were filled with righteous indignation, and some expected better from them. He couldn't understand why these experts, who were hailed as future pillars of the world, were so useless. Even if they weren't Lu Ye's match, they should at least have the time to admit defeat. How could Lu Ye defeat them all in one fell swoop? Lu Ye's actions were undoubtedly aimed at the Myriad Devil Ridge and slapped them in the face. If this list had been arranged by someone, it would have been easy to deal with. They could have just removed it so as to avoid being humiliated. However, the Spirit Stream list was something that was created by the heavens, and no one could interfere with it. Any Spirit Stream stage cultivator with enough strength could investigate it. Such a list was undoubtedly a disgrace to the Myriad Devil Ridge. Every Myriad Devil Ridge cultivator who could check the list felt a burning sensation on their face when they saw the rankings, as if they had been slapped in the face a few times. Lu Ye's crazy behavior caused the Myriad Devil Ridge cultivators to feel humiliated. However, the Grand Heaven Alliance was happy to see this. People were constantly spreading the news of the changes in the Spirit Stream list. Every time Lu Ye's ranking rose, and the Myriad Devil Ridge cultivators he had challenged completely disappeared from the Spirit Stream list, it would cause a round of cheers. On the third day, Lu Ye's ranking had reached the 50th place. Not a single one of them could fight. This was what Lu Yi felt the most during the past few days of challenging the list. No matter what faction the Myriad Devil Ridge cultivators belonged to, no matter what terrain they chose, as long as they were discovered by Lu Yi, the battle would be over in a short period of time. Moreover, with Hupo around, those people didn't even have the chance to admit defeat. Hupo only had one thing to do, and that was to squat on Lu Ye's shoulder. Whenever a challenged cultivator showed signs of wanting to speak, he would immediately roar. Under the tiger's roar, only death awaited. Inside the wooden house in the Myriad Poison Forest, Lu Yi was still cultivating while letting the innate skill tree devour the earthcore fire. He had been busy challenging the list these past few days, so he had only consumed 20 of the earthcore fire. This allowed Lu Yi to obtain 2 new spiritual tattoos. One was a golden arc, and the other was a lightning attraction. After investigating the specific information of these 2 spiritual tattoos, he found that if these 2 spiritual tattoos were constructed, they could be used as a magical technique. This time, he was walking further and further on the path of a magical cultivator. However, because his spirit energy was fire elemental and metal elemental, if he constructed these 2 spiritual tattoos to activate a magical technique, it might be different from a normal magical technique. These 2 spiritual tattoos were best used to set up some killing arrays, as they would have some unique effect. He had already issued a challenge to the person ranked 48. Although the other party had accepted the challenge, they didn't start immediately and would probably have to wait for another 4 hours. Lu Yi took out a portion of the earthcore fire and let the innate skill tree devour it. He also diverted some of his attention to cultivate. The 20 portions of earthcore fire were quickly devoured. Lu Yi looked at the innate skill tree expectantly, wanting to know what other new spiritual tattoos he could obtain. He was slightly stunned when he took a look. That was because there were no new leaves burning. However, in a certain area of the innate skill tree, there was a large patch of leaves glowing red. He had experienced this situation once before. It was when he devoured the true phoenix fire in the land of fire. At that time, when he was devouring the true phoenix fire, a large patch of leaves also reacted at the same time. It was only when the true phoenix fire was completely devoured that those leaves all burned, outlining the figure of a vermilion bird standing on the treetops. Then, he obtained the fire phoenix spiritual tattoo. Now that a similar situation had occurred again, this was probably another special spiritual tattoo. Lu Yi carefully checked and found that there weren't as many leaves as the fire phoenix spiritual tattoo. There were only about 10 leaves. Even so, it was still very impressive. Ever since he obtained the fire phoenix spiritual tattoo, Lu Yi was especially looking forward to the appearance of this special spiritual tattoo. This special spiritual tattoo was far more powerful than ordinary spiritual tattoo. The arrangement of the leaves glowing red on the innate skill tree wasn't messy and disorderly. Instead, it was symmetrical. Looking at it, if the symmetrical leaves were linked together, it would look like a pair of wings. Lu Yi was instantly energized. Could it be? It was very possible. After devouring 20 portions of earthcore fire, the dozen or so leaves glowed red. He didn't know how many more he had to devour before they burned completely. Chapter 392. What made Lu Yi feel helpless was that he didn't have the core flame. If he had known this would happen, he would have spent all his merit points in the Tianji Business Alliance a few days ago. He checked his merit points and found that he had more than 2,500. He could buy 10 sets of core flame, but it was definitely not enough. Even if he sold all the spoils he had collected in the past few days to the Tianji treasury, he wouldn't get too many merit points. Where would he find the core flame? Lu Yi was worried. At the same time, in the core region, in a second-grade sex station in the Myriad Devil Ridge, 2 Heaven 9 cultivators sat side by side on a huge rock near a cliff. They were a man and a woman. The man had a dignified appearance and an extraordinary bearing. The woman was as beautiful as a flower and had an exquisite figure. She nestled in the man's arms, looking very intimate. The two of them were the station's guardian and deputy guardian. Without mentioning the man, the woman was Bailan, who was ranked 48th on the spirit stream list. Looking at her wide robes and large sleeves, it was clear that she was a magic cultivator. Only magic cultivators who did not need to fight in close quarters would wear such loose clothes. For example, weapon cultivators, body cultivators, and ghost cultivators would generally choose to wear close-fitting clothes to make it easier for them to fight. However, she was proud of her capital. Even though her clothes were loose, they couldn't hide her vigorous capital. Bailan held the man's hand and said softly, "Senior brother, don't worry. I chose the terrain suitable for magical cultivators. No matter how fierce Lu Yi is, he can't kill me with one strike. If I can't beat him, I will admit defeat." It had to be said that many of the Spirit Stream list experts that Lu Yi had killed had the same thought when they accepted the challenge. Heaven 9 against Heaven 8. If I can't beat him, don't I have the chance to admit defeat? As it turned out, they really didn't. Are you sure it was Lu Yi who challenged you? The man's expression was full of worry. Bailan smiled. He has been fighting the list for the past few days. Every cultivator who is ranked higher than him has been challenged by him. Now, he is ranked 50th and I am 48. Who else could it be other than him? Such a thug. Junior sister, why don't you just reject him? If I refuse, the sect will be humiliated. How will my junior brothers and sisters be able to hold their heads high in the core circle in the future? If he didn't even have the courage to accept a challenge, then he would become a laughingstock. Furthermore, the matter of Lu Ye's attempt to challenge the spirit stream rankings had attracted the attention of many divine sea realm experts from the great sects of the myriad Devil Ridge. Those divine sea realm experts felt that it was an opportunity. Now that Lu Yi was nowhere to be found on the spirit stream battlefield, if there was someone who could have killed him while he was fighting, then there would be no need to waste time and effort looking for him. Since he couldn't count on those ranked after the 50th place on the spirit stream list, he could only count on those ranked in the top 50. If he couldn't count on the top 50, then he would count on the top 10. After all, they couldn't possibly let him kill his way to the top of the spirit stream list, could they? There had to be someone who could defeat him and kill him. But the man still wanted to say something, but Bailan had already raised her hand to cover his mouth. She said softly, "That's enough. Don't worry. Master gave me a high-grade spiritual artifact a few days ago. Its defense is extremely strong. Although I can't display the full power of this spiritual artifact with my cultivation base, I won't be in any danger." The man lowered his head to look at her earlobe. There was an extremely beautiful earring that looked like a teardrop. He suddenly understood. "So, this is the spiritual artifact that the second elder gave you." A teasing smile appeared on Bailan's face. "What else could it be? Senior brother, who do you think gave it to me?" The man smiled embarrassedly. Bailan reached out and tickled him. "Senior brother, how can you think of me like that?" The man quickly begged for mercy. 4 hours passed in a flash. Under the man's worried gaze, Bailan's figure disappeared. In a small space that was about a dozen miles in radius, the fragrance of flowers filled the air. The environment of this small space was extremely beautiful. As usual, Yi had almost immediately burrowed into the ground. After Lu Ye's vision recovered, he looked around. He didn't see any traces of his enemy. From the name on the spirit stream list, he guessed that his opponent this time should be a woman. The small space wasn't small, so he eliminated the possibility that his opponent was a body cultivator or a weapon cultivator. As for a medical cultivator, that was even more impossible. After the 50th place on the spirit stream list, there might be a few medical cultivators who cultivated in other factions. However, before the 50th place, there wasn't even a shadow of a medical cultivator. After all, a cultivator's energy was limited. If one cultivated in 2 factions at the same time, it would be impossible for them to have a strong battle prowess. Was it a magic cultivator? Or a ghost cultivator? All in all, Lu Yi had experienced 20 to 30 battles in the past few days. Other than medical cultivators, he had fought against cultivators from various sections. He had even encountered some strange sections. Originally, for a weapon cultivator, the most effective opponent was a body cultivator. Ghost cultivators were also difficult to deal with, but that was only for ordinary weapon cultivators. For Lu Yi, his physique wasn't inferior to any body cultivator at the spirit stream realm. In fact, it was even stronger. When he clashed with body cultivators, he would usually end the battle in 2 or 3 rounds. As for the ghost cultivators, whose bodies were as fragile as magic cultivators, if they dared to sneak near Lu Yi, they would have to experience what it meant to have eyes that were as bright as torches. Relatively speaking, among the factions, Lu Yi liked to meet ghost cultivators the most. That was because ghost cultivators relied on their ability to communicate with the netherworld and would take the initiative to sneak near him. Then, every ghost cultivator who sneaked near him would be killed without knowing how they were exposed. Next were magic cultivators, who were easy to kill. As long as he could break through their defenses, he would basically be able to kill them with a single slash. The task of finding the enemy's tracks was left to Yi. Lu Yi stood in place and waited quietly. At the same time, he threw a few spirit pills into his mouth and chewed them with his cheeks puffed up. Ever since he started cultivating, he had eaten too many spirit pills to the point of vomiting. Lu Yi really wanted to give the alchemists a suggestion. Could they make some different flavors? For example, apple-flavored, orange-flavored, or even banana-flavored. He ate dozens of spirit pills of the same flavor every day. He really couldn't stand it. He sent a message saying that she had found the female cultivator. She was obviously very vigilant and was constantly changing her position to avoid being ambushed by Lu Yi. Lu Yi, she's so big. Yi's message was mixed with some strange information. She's even bigger than Big Sister Huaci. Age. No, she's the one you like. What nonsense are you spouting? Don't be soft-hearted later. In the small space, Bailan didn't dare fly on her weapon because she had long heard that Lu Ye's speed was unparalleled. Even sword cultivators couldn't fly as fast as Lu Yi. As a magic cultivator, she didn't dare show off her slight skill in front of an expert. She moved quickly, searching for traces of Lu Yi. As a magic cultivator, if she wanted to defeat Lu Yi, her only hope was to not let Lu Yi get close to her. As long as she could put enough distance between them, no matter how strong Lu Yi was, she would be blasted to pieces by her spells. Suddenly she stopped. In the direction she was heading, there was an additional figure standing there expressionlessly, as if he had been waiting for her for a long time. Lu Yi. Bailan's reaction couldn't be said to be slow. The moment she saw Lu Yi, she raised her hand and cast a spell. Spiritual power surged and water rippled, forming a fog. 3 fierce beasts made purely of spiritual power rushed out from the fog and pounced at Lu Yi from 3 directions. She raised her hand and pointed, and a huge disk of spiritual power appeared above her head. Runes flowed on the disk, and as the runes flowed, water arrows blotted out the sky and shot toward Lu Yi. Lu Yi raised an eyebrow. She thought to herself that the top 50 cultivators were not the same as the previous ones. Their casting speed, strength, and distance were indeed something she had never seen before. Among the 5 elements, water element spells were generally weak, but the water element spells Bailan used didn't have this problem. The power of each spell was not inferior to that of the other elements. The weapon box buzzed, and 9 spirit weapons flew into the sky. They were divided into 3 groups and went to meet the 3 ferocious beasts. At the same time, he pulled out the Pan Shan saber at his waist. Spiritual energy surged around him, and he accurately split the water arrows that shot at him. The collision of fire and water element spiritual power caused a large amount of fog to appear in the space between the 2 of them. Bailan stared at Lu Yi, and although her expression didn't show it, her heart was filled with shock. Lu Yi's mind was so strong. She could control 9 spirit artifacts, and each one was like an extension of her body. Not only that, but she could also split her attention to split her water arrows without missing a single one. This only showed that the other side was able to deal with her attacks with ease and didn't even bother to dodge. At this moment, Bailan's heart ached. Every spell cultivator hoped that their mind was as strong as possible, because the stronger the mind, the better the control of spiritual power, and the stronger the spell, they would even do some special cultivation to strengthen their mental strength. However, this weapon cultivator's mind was far stronger than a spell cultivator's, and Bailan couldn't help but be envious. The disk in the sky slowly disappeared, and the water arrows stopped falling. Lu Yi put away his blade, and in the next moment, he frowned, and the 9 spirit artifacts flew back into the weapon box. He sensed that the connection between the 9 spirit artifacts and himself seemed to have weakened a lot. The 3 fierce beasts formed by water element spiritual power were not only a killing move, but also had the effect of eroding spirit artifacts. Water element formless. It seemed that this was Bailan's unique ability. With this ability, other people would be at a disadvantage if they fought against her with spirit artifacts, because the power of the spirit artifacts would rapidly weaken. Bailan was about to activate another spell, but Lu Yi raised his hand. Wait! Bailan looked at him vigilantly, and her spiritual power was ready to be released. What? In battle, Lu Yi rarely said anything to the enemy, but this time, for the sake of the dozen or so leaves on the innate skill tree that hadn't been burned, he had to say something. "I want 20 earth core flames." Bailon was confused, and obviously didn't understand. The spiritual stream list challenge was nothing more than a matter of life and death, or one side would take the initiative to admit defeat. Why did Louis suddenly ask for some earth core flames? Was there something wrong with this person's brain? It's sold in the Tianji treasure house, and one is worth 200 merit points. I want 20. For some reason, Bailon calculated seriously. Then wouldn't it cost 4,000 merit points? After saying that, her face darkened. Why was she calculating this? Chapter 393. Yes, 4,000 merit points. You may not have that many merit points, but I think you should have a way to get them. The most common way to get merit points was to kill enemies, and one could also get them by selling things in the Tianji treasure house. Under normal circumstances, it was very difficult for a spirit stream realm cultivator to accumulate so many merit points. Of course, if one was a guardian or deputy guardian of a station, they could also get it by giving themselves a monthly salary. 4,000 merit points was a huge number for cultivators in the outer or inner circle, but for some cultivators in the core circle, it was not impossible for them to get it if they worked hard. Especially for a powerful and beautiful female cultivator like Bailon, who would be protected in any sect. Even if she could not get it herself, someone would find a way to get it for her. Louis wanted 20 earth core flames. It was not an exorbitant demand, but a number given after comprehensive consideration. "Why should I give you 20 earth core flames?" Bailon said angrily. This was the first time she had encountered such a situation in a spirit stream list challenge, and it really made her speechless. This sect exterminator Ye's fierce reputation was like thunder to her ears, but now that she saw him, she knew that there was something wrong with his head. Thinking about it, if there was nothing wrong with his head, would the entire myriad Devil Ridge be against him? "If you want to fight, then fight." "What are you talking about?" Bailon shouted. Then, she saw Louis leaving an afterimage behind her as she rushed towards her at high speed. She raised her hand and shot out spell after spell, continuously bombarding Louis. However, that person was actually shuttling back and forth between the spells, accurately avoiding each attack and quickly closing the distance between them. If an ordinary cultivator encountered such a situation, they would definitely open up a distance and continuously attack while retreating. But Bailon was an expert ranked 48th on the spirit stream list, so how could she be an ordinary cultivator? Moreover, the moment Louis moved, she realized that their speeds were not on the same level. Not only was Louis unparalleled in the speed of his flying tool, but his own speed was also amazing. She could not retreat far at all. Therefore, she made a prompt decision and formed a seal with one hand. At the same time, a ray of light suddenly lit up on the back of her hand. It was not the light of a battlefield mark, but the light of a spirit pattern. On the back of this woman's hand, there was a tattoo made by a spirit pattern master. The Jade Blood sect had a spirit rune grandmaster like Madame Yun, so how could the myriad Devil Ridge not have one? However, things like inscriptions were too valuable, so very few spirit stream realm cultivators had them. Not to mention the various materials needed to inscribe the spiritual inscriptions, it would also cost a lot to hire those spiritual rune masters. To be more realistic, the tattooed wings that Louis had obtained before were not inferior to a magic tool in terms of value. Furthermore, tattoos were divided into visible tattoos, hidden tattoos, temporary tattoos, and permanent tattoos. Each type of tattoos required different resources. The tattoo that Bailon had used was obviously a hidden tattoo, because it could not be seen before. It would only appear when she activated it. This way, it could catch the enemy off guard. He just didn't know if this was temporary or permanent. If it was the latter, then the cost of inscribing this spirit rune would be huge. Although the spirit rune disappeared in a flash, Louis could still see it clearly. It looked a little familiar, like the thunder-guiding spirit rune that he had just obtained. The surrounding area was full of fog formed by the collision of water and fire spirit power. It covered a large area, so it was too late to escape from this area. Lu Yi immediately understood his opponent's plan. He immediately urged his spirit power to cover his body with a layer of defensive spirit runes. A bolt of lightning fell directly towards Lu Ye's location. In an instant, the area covered by the fog was covered by lightning snakes, and the sound of crackling could be heard. Lu Ye's body shook as he felt the strength of the top 50 of the spirit stream list. The defensive spirit rune around his body rapidly weakened. Even if he desperately urged his spirit power to maintain the spirit rune's operation, it only lasted for 3 breaths of time before it broke. Few spirit stream realm cultivators could withstand the power of this kind of lightning. Under Bai Lan's horrified gaze, Lu Ye's face was charred black as he rushed out of the lightning-filled space. As he rushed, he spat out a mouthful of black qi. Although Bai Lan was shocked, her hands did not stop moving. A lifelike, ferocious water dragon rushed towards Lu Yi, and at the same time, she quickly retreated. She had no choice but to retreat. Her strongest trump card had not been able to do anything to Lu Yi, so how could she dare to stay where she was? The Pan Shan saber wrapped in flames slashed down. When it collided with the water dragon, a huge impact came head-on, which made Lu Ye's saber tremble slightly. A light flashed on the saber as it was reinforced by the heavy-pressure spirit rune. The long saber broke the water dragon in two like a hot knife through butter. In an instant, it was in front of Bai Lan and fiercely chopped down. Bai Lan's face was full of fear. She touched a tear-like earring on her earlobe, and as her spirit power surged, a layer of protection quickly formed. Lu Yi originally did not intend to take Bai Lan's life. After all, he was counting on her to give him the Earth Core Fire. If he killed her, there would be no Earth Core Fire. However, when he saw the layer of protection, the Pan Shan saber flashed again, and the dual sharpness spirit rune was strengthened. Under the attack, Bai Lan's body flew out like a ragged sack, looking very embarrassed. The protection was not broken, so she was not injured. After all, the earring was a high-grade spirit weapon. Even if she could not use all of its power, it was enough to protect her from death. However, under this saber, the protective light curtain's luster was greatly reduced, and the huge impact could not be offset. Bai Lan hurriedly got up, but before she could stand firm, she felt a strong attack and flew out again. This time, the protective light curtain was extremely dim. It could not withstand the third saber strike. Bai Lan panicked. She thought that with this high-grade spirit weapon given by her master, she could be in an invincible position, but now she knew that she had underestimated this thug. The strength of the other party's attack was beyond her understanding. She really could not understand how the power of a saber strike from a Tianba cultivator could be so terrifying. Lu Yi did not chase after her, but stood quietly in place. Bai Lan hurriedly got up and looked at Lu Yi from a distance, still in shock. "You have half an hour." After saying this, Lu Yi shouted again, "I admit defeat." His figure quickly faded and then disappeared. Bai Lan was dumbfounded. She was ready to admit defeat, but the other party actually admitted defeat first. What was this? Bai Lan instantly understood Lu Ye's plan. In half an hour, that thug would come and challenge her again. Damn it! On the huge rock near the cliff, the man anxiously waited. Although his junior sister had a high-grade spirit weapon to protect her, Lu Ye's previous battle record was obvious to all. Since he started fighting, none of the Wanmo Ridge's cultivators who were ranked higher than him had survived. His junior sister was his heart, so how could he not be worried? Just as he was feeling uneasy, the space in front of him distorted, and his junior sister's figure suddenly appeared. The man looked at her, then looked at the spirit stream list. His junior sister's ranking had not changed, and Lu Ye's ranking had not changed either. "You won?" the man cried out in surprise. Bai Lan looked at her senior brother with a pale face. Thinking that she would have to face that aggressive thug again in half an hour, her mouth twitched. Senior brother, the man's expression changed, and he nervously asked, "What's wrong, junior sister? Are you hurt?" Sob, sob, sob. Bailon threw herself into his arms and cried. The man was extremely anxious. "Are you hurt anywhere? Tell me quickly." Bailon just kept crying and shook her head. The man's face turned green. His junior sister did not have any injuries, but she was so sad. Could it be, bastard Louia, you and I cannot exist under the same sky? After a while, when Bailon calmed down, the man finally understood the situation. His heart relaxed. Things were not as he thought. "You said that bastard asked you for 20 earthen core flames?" "Yes." "Then he will challenge you again in half an hour." "He definitely will." Just now, he admitted defeat and left the battle arena. Bailon shuddered when she recalled the aggressiveness of that thug wielding his saber. She had fought with many weapon cultivators before, but none of them had ever given her such a strong sense of oppression. That long saber wrapped in flames did not hurt her body, but it made her spirit feel like it was riddled with holes. No matter what, she did not want to fight with that kind of person. The feeling of her life being in danger was very uncomfortable. She was sure that if it were not for the high-grade spirit weapon given to her by her master, she would have died in the battle just now. That's simple. When he challenges you later, just refuse. It's not like you have to fight with him. The crying Bailon sniffled. She thought about it again. That's right. I have the right to refuse. There is no need to fight with him. As long as my ranking on the spirit stream list is lower than his, he will never find trouble with me. That hateful guy actually wants to extort 20 earthen core flames from me. Go die. Senior brother is smart. Bailon smiled through her tears. She wiped the tears from the corner of her eyes and relaxed. Inside the wooden house in the Thousand Poison Forest, Lu Yi was cultivating. Yi and Hua Ci sat in front of him, facing Lu Yi together. Stare. If you have something to say, just say it. Lu Yi was a little uncomfortable being stared at. Hua Ci said in a strange tone, I didn't know that the dignified sect exterminator Yi would be a man who cares about women. Yi added, he doesn't care about all women, unless they have a lot of capital. How much? Well, at least older than you. Hua Ci thought for a moment. Isn't that a tiring life? I don't know. Yi expressed that she had never experienced such a burden. She asked curiously, Sister Hua Ci, are you tired? Hua Ci smiled gently. I'm fine. That's enough. Seeing that the two women were slowly going off topic, Lu Yi couldn't bear it anymore. Am I that kind of person in your eyes? The two women thought about it seriously and nodded together. Yi said, when we set out from Azure Cloud Mountain, didn't you like it when those female cultivators preached to you? The more they preached, the more you enjoyed it. Hua Ci also said, I still remember the first time we met. Some people were wrapped up like rice dumplings, but their eyes were very shifty. You misunderstood me. Lu Yi was a little sad. Chapter 394. Inside the wooden house, Lu Yi couldn't take it anymore, and kicked Yi and Hua Ci out. After checking the spirit stream list, he pondered for a moment, then focused his mind on the battlefield imprint. He found Yu Lianzhou's imprint and sent him a message. Fellow Taoist Yu, do you know anyone ranked after 50th on the spirit stream list? Soon Yu Lianzhou replied, I know most of them, but there are a few I haven't contacted. What's the matter? I want you to help me pass a message to them. It didn't take long for Yu Lianzhou to understand Lu Ye's intentions. Although he didn't know why, he still replied, leave it to me. If he wanted to get what he wanted from Bailon, he couldn't rely on himself. He needed the cooperation of others. After ending his message with Yu Lianzhou, Lu Ye's mind connected to the spirit stream list, and he issued another challenge to Bailon. Aside from some rules, there weren't many restrictions when challenging someone on the spirit stream list. Therefore, even though Lu Yi had just admitted defeat, he could still issue another challenge. On a boulder near the cliff, Bai Lan was talking to her senior brother about the details of her fight with Lu Yi. Because her senior brother was also on the spirit stream list, and was ranked higher than her, Lu Yi would challenge him sooner or later. If she could get more information about Lu Yi, she would be able to deal with him more easily later on. Suddenly, there was movement from the battlefield imprint. Bai Lan checked it and immediately became unhappy. Lu Yi is challenging me again. He said he would fight for an hour, but it's only been the time it takes to brew a cup of tea. He went back on his word. Just ignore him, the man said with a laugh. Yeah, I rejected him. Bai Lan leaned into her senior brother's embrace. Now that she was ranked 50th on the spirit stream list, and Lu Yi had jumped to 48th, she wouldn't have to worry about being challenged by him in the future. Just as she was thinking about that, the positions of the 48th and 53rd cultivators suddenly swap. Lu Yi had jumped to 53rd, and the person who was originally ranked 53rd had replaced Lu Yi in the 48th position. The smile on Bai Lan's face gradually stiffened. Something was wrong. Senior brother. Bai Lan's voice was trembling. Such a rapid change in the rankings clearly meant that the cultivator from Grand Heaven Alliance, who was originally ranked 53rd, had challenged Lu Yi and was rejected. Rejecting the challenge was equivalent to admitting defeat, which was why the rankings had swapped. When Lu Yi was ranked 48th, she was indeed unable to challenge her, but now that she was ranked 53rd, she was qualified to challenge her. Her senior brother was obviously also paying attention to the spirit stream list. He immediately realized that something was amiss. Did he challenge you again? Bai Lan really wanted to cry. Originally, he thought that as long as he was ranked behind Lu Yi, he wouldn't have to worry about being challenged by him. Who would have thought that Lu Yi would have such a bizarre move? Lu Yi's attitude was very clear. She would rather drop her ranking than let her go. They were like maggots that could not be shaken off. Bai Lan hurriedly refused, and their rankings swapped again. This time, Bai Lan was 53 and Lu Yi was 50. But soon, Lu Yi fell to 55. He had been challenged by the person who was originally 55. It wasn't just the two of them who were paying attention to the spirit stream list. At the moment, there were many people from both the Myriad Devil's Ridge and the Grand Heaven Alliance who were paying close attention to the changes in the spirit stream list. There was no other reason. In the past few days, Lu Yi's ranking had risen too quickly. Many people had been paying attention to him. Then, numerous pairs of eyes witnessed a bizarre event that had never happened since the spirit stream list was created. Lu Yi from the Jade Blood sect and a female cultivator called Bai Lan from the Moistening Rain sect were constantly moving up and down on the spirit stream list. From time to time, their positions would be swapped. Although some of them were moving up and some were moving down, due to the participation of other cultivators from the Grand Heaven Alliance, their rankings were constantly sliding down. Every time, they would only drop by 2 or 3 places, but the frequency was fast. In the blink of an eye, their rankings would change. In less than the time it took to brew a cup of tea, their rankings had dropped from the top 50 to the bottom 70. The spirit stream list had been broken. No one had ever done such a thing. It wasn't that such a thing was difficult to achieve, but that everyone who entered the spirit stream list had to move forward step by step. Who would want to fall back? The higher one's ranking was, the better the rewards from Tianji. Those were real rewards. But now they were witnessing it. Lu Yi was retreating. Not only was he retreating, he was also pulling someone else along with him. Others had no choice but to do so. In the Moistening Rain sect, Bai Lan's eyes were empty. She couldn't understand why she was being targeted like this. If she was guilty, she should have let Tianji punish her, not send Lu Yi to torture her like this. There were so many people on the spirit stream list, so why did that thug choose her? Junior sister, pull yourself together, junior sister. The man grabbed Bai Lan's shoulder and shook her vigorously. Looking at his junior sister's haggard expression, his heart ached. Senior brother, Bai Lan cried out. Accept his challenge, the man said in a deep voice. But I'm not his match. I'm not asking you to fight him. You have 4 hours to accept his challenge. Keep stalling. I'll think of something. In the wooden house in the forest of 1,000 poisons, Lu Ye raised his eyebrows. Did he finally accept the challenge? It seemed like he wanted to stall for time, but it was meaningless. He held a book in his hand, swallowed a spirit pill, and calmed his heart to cultivate. At the same time, there were some unfriendly comments about Lu Ye in the spirit stream battlefield. They said that he was bullying a woman and not a man. They also said that he only knew how to challenge those in the bottom 50 of the spirit stream list and liked to bully the weak. If he really had the ability, he should continue to challenge those in the top 50. There was even a cultivator from the myriad Devil Ridge, who was ranked 34, who said that he was superior to Louis. Once these comments were made, many cultivators from the myriad Devil Ridge, who were ranked higher on the list, also said that Lu Ye should hurry up and accept his death. During this time, the cultivators from the Grand Heaven Alliance were enraptured. Lu Ye had killed 20 to 30 experts from the myriad Devil Ridge in just a few days, which made them even more satisfied. They were all looking forward to seeing him reach a higher position and kill even more experts from the myriad Devil Ridge. Now that there were so many unfriendly comments about Lu Ye, the Grand Heaven Alliance naturally couldn't stand it. For a time, the entire Spirit Stream battlefield was bustling with noise and excitement. All kinds of curses and arguments filled the air, and some of the more irritable ones even began to challenge him. The rankings of the Spirit Stream list changed so quickly that it was unprecedented. Communication between cultivators was extremely convenient, so all kinds of news naturally reached Lu Ye's ears through some channels. He didn't care about it. No matter how much the people from the myriad Devil Ridge scolded him or provoked him, he wouldn't suffer any real losses. At most, his reputation would be tarnished. He didn't have a good reputation in the myriad Devil Ridge. Every 4 hours, his and Bai Lan's rankings would change. Every time, Bai Lan would accept a challenge and then ignore him for 4 hours. This was the rule of the Spirit Stream list. Lu Ye had no choice but to wait. As for the guy ranked 34, Lu Ye looked at him and found that he was from the same sect as Bai Lan. They were probably fellow disciples. With this kind of relationship, it was understandable that he wanted to stand up for Bai Lan. And these clamorous comments must have been released by this person. However, this moistening rain sect was still very good. A second-grade sect actually had 2 people occupying the top 50 of the Spirit Stream list. This was rare even in the 9 provinces. Previously, Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan's situation was special. They were both from the Pill Heart sect, but they were able to occupy the top positions of the Spirit Stream list. In a flash, 3 days had passed. Lu Ye and Bai Lan's rankings had fallen to the bottom of the list. Now Lu Ye was ranked 100, and Bai Lan was ranked 97. If the rankings changed again, one of them would definitely fall out of the Spirit Stream list. As for who would fall out of the list, the answer was self-evident. In the moistening rain sect station, Bai Lan's eyes were red and swollen. She had been under a lot of pressure for the past few days, and had barely rested. Senior brother. Bai Lan lowered her head in guilt. In front of her, the man placed a storage pouch in Bai Lan's hand. There are 20 earth core flames inside. When you give it to him, remember to make him swear a heavenly secret oath that he will not make things difficult for you in the future. Senior brother, the man raised his hand to stop her. There are only a few days left until the reward is bestowed by Heavenly Secret. If you fall out of the list at this time, then all your previous accumulations will go to waste. This item was given by our sect. The sect master and second elder both want to keep the peace and do their best to protect your reward from Heavenly Secret. If you lose face, then so be it. There will be a chance to get it back in the future. If the ranking on the Spirit Stream list was just an empty title, then it would be fine. No one would feel bad if they fell out of the list. However, the ranking on the spirit stream list was related to the reward from Heavenly Secret. For spirit stream stage cultivators, it was a rare benefit. No one would easily miss it. There were only a few days left until Heavenly Secret would bestow the reward to Bailon. If they fell out of the list at this time, it would be too much of a loss. 4,000 merit points was not a small amount. However, compared to the future of an elite disciple, it was nothing. As a second-grade sect, the Moistening Rain sect could naturally afford it. "He hasn't challenged you yet, right?" the man asked again. "Yes. It seems that he is giving you time to prepare. This is the final ultimatum." Lu Ye was currently ranked in the top 100. If he challenged her again, Bailon would fall to the top 100. Then, if Lu Ye manipulated her a little, she would easily fall out of the list. When he challenged her again, Bailon's name would completely disappear from the spirit stream list. Even if she had the chance to re-enter the list, the time she had accumulated before would be nullified. She would have to start counting again for a month. So, you have to make things clear with him later. Then, try your best to reach the highest rank in the shortest time possible. Leave the rest to me. I will definitely make Lu Ye pay the price. Bailon wanted to say that senior brother might not be a match for that thug. However, she was afraid of hurting senior brother's self-esteem. "He challenged me." Bailon's expression suddenly changed as she checked the battlefield imprint. "Go." Bailon nodded and grabbed the storage bag with the 20 earthcore flames. She calmed her mind, chose the terrain, and accepted the challenge. Chapter 395. The space distorted and the field of vision changed. Bailon's figure gradually appeared in the same battlefield. This time, she didn't hide, but summoned her flying spirit tool. It was a beautiful spiritual artifact that looked like a feather. Standing on the spiritual artifact, Bailon soared into the sky. The battlefield was a dozen miles wide. It wasn't big, but it wasn't small either. If everyone was on the ground, it would take a lot of effort to find them, but it was easy to fly in the air. "Lu Ye." Bailon wanted to shout out the name of the thug to show that she was not afraid of him, but when the words reached the tip of her tongue, her voice inexplicably weakened. It was as if the name was enough to remind her of the trauma buried deep in her heart. As soon as she finished speaking, a stream of light soared into the sky from somewhere below. Bailon was shocked and hurriedly urged the power of the earrings to cover her body. Only then did she feel a little safer. Lu Ye didn't attack her. Instead, he hovered 30 feet away from her, his hand on the hilt of his knife, his face calm as he looked forward. When this woman called Bailon accepted his challenge, he knew that his plan had succeeded. She should have prepared 20 earth core flames. Otherwise, she wouldn't have accepted his challenge. Everything was going well. He had planned to kick Bailon out of the spirit stream list if things didn't go well. Then, he would find someone else. There were so many myriad Devil Ridge cultivators on the spirit stream list. There were bound to be 1 or 2 heroes who knew how to adapt to circumstances. Now, it seemed that it wouldn't be too troublesome. "Don't come any closer. I'm warning you, if you dare to take 1 step closer, I'll..." shout those 3 words. In the sky, Bailon shouted seriously, using the fiercest tone to say the most cowardly words. As for which 3 words she was referring to, everyone was well aware. Down below, who had been preparing to search for Bailon, quietly revealed herself. After hearing her words, she couldn't help but hold her forehead. What kind of psychological torture had this woman gone through in the past few days? Why would she say such words after seeing Lu Ye? In the air, Lu Ye's gaze fell on the storage bag in Bailon's hand. He understood and reached out to her. "I've prepared it. I can give it to you." Bailon stared at Lu Ye vigilantly, as if she was guarding against a hungry rabbit. "But you have to swear a heavenly secret oath that you won't make things difficult for me for no reason in the spirit stream list." "Okay. Swear it." Lu Ye stared at him expressionlessly. "Swear it," Bailon urged. Lu Ye retracted his hand and pressed on the saber hilt at his waist. he slowly pulled out the Pan-Shan saber. The sound of the saber being unsheathed was extremely ear-piercing. Bai Lan's face turned pale. She retreated cautiously. "What are you doing? I won't make any heavenly oath. Since I've made a promise to you, I'll keep it. You can choose to believe it or not. It's up to you." Lu Yi held his saber in his hand, and his spiritual power surged. The long saber was covered in flames, and he assumed an attacking posture. He pointed the tip of his saber at Bai Lan, and by the time he finished speaking, he had already turned into a stream of light and rushed towards Bai Lan. In that instant, even with the protection of a high-grade spiritual weapon, Bai Lan couldn't help but feel a prickling sensation in her back. Almost as soon as Lu Yi moved, she threw the storage bag in her hand forward and shouted, "I'll give it all to you, I'll give it all to you." "This is too much of a bully," sob. Lu Yi, who was rushing forward, suddenly stopped. He grabbed the storage bag and opened it. After checking the contents, he confirmed that there were indeed 20 earth core fire. Feeling satisfied, he raised his head and looked forward. "Do you want me to send you off?" This woman called Bai Lan still hadn't left. Bai Lan felt wronged. "You've already extorted so many things from me. Can't you just admit defeat?" She didn't want to fall to the 100th place. She was currently ranked 97th. Although she was only 3 places away from the 100th place, the last 3 places on the Spirit Stream list were the most troublesome. This was because everyone who had the strength to challenge the Spirit Stream list would choose to challenge these 3 people. This was the rule of the Spirit Stream list. When Lu Yi had first started to challenge the list, he had started with these 3 people. If she didn't have the strength to rush up, she would fall off the list sooner or later. If she was ranked 97th, she wouldn't have to worry about that. Lu Yi immediately understood her thoughts. Since he had taken advantage of her, his mouth would be soft. 4,000 merit points was enough to satisfy her request. Lu Yi felt that he was a reasonable person. Of course, this was also because his opponent's words made sense. "I admit defeat." With that, Lu Ye's figure disappeared, returning to the wooden house in the Myriad Poisons forest. Yan Hupo also appeared beside him. Now that he had 20 portions of Earthcore Flame, he didn't know whether or not he would be able to completely ignite the leaves. Lu Yi took out a portion of Earthcore Flame and was about to devour it when the battlefield imprint suddenly vibrated. He had been challenged. At the same time, a message was quickly spreading in the Yi League. All the cultivators who had the qualifications to challenge the Spirit Stream list were to challenge Lu Yi in batches, making it impossible for him to challenge the Spirit Stream list again. Furthermore, if this continued, no matter how strong he was, he would be replaced sooner or later. This matter was initiated by Shi Guang from the Profound Tao sect, and received the full support of the cultivators from the various Myriad Devil Ridge sections. Many cultivators were actively participating. Lu Yi was too hateful. Previously, when he had challenged the Spirit Stream list, he had wiped out all the Myriad Devil Ridge cultivators ranked above him. Even now, no one knew how he had done it. In a challenge for the Spirit Stream list, if one was no match for the opponent, they could simply shout out the word, "Admit defeat." That way, they would be able to preserve their life, unless the difference in strength between the 2 sides was too great, and one side had the opportunity to instantly kill the other. This time, Shi Guang had initiated the initiative to challenge Lu Yi in batches. First, he wanted to delay him so that he wouldn't have the opportunity to challenge the Spirit Stream list again. If possible, he wanted to drag him down from the Spirit Stream list. Second, he wanted to figure out how this guy could make the Myriad Devil Ridge cultivators unable to even shout out the word, "Admit defeat." Shi Guang knew that Lu Yi was very strong, and that he indeed had the ability to instantly kill an ordinary Tianjiu. Therefore, he had specifically instructed that all the challengers should use all of their defensive measures before entering the battlefield. Furthermore, it was best to have a body cultivator challenge them in the early stages. They didn't really expect to win against Lu Yi, and their main goal was to exhaust his spiritual power. When the time was right, people from other sects could take the stage and defeat him. Inside the wooden house, Lu Yi had been looking forward to using his innate skill tree to devour the 20 portions of earthcore flame. He wanted to see if the new spiritual pattern was the one he was looking for. However, he had never expected to be challenged at such a critical moment. How infuriating! His mind entered the battlefield imprint, and he connected it to the spirit stream list. He accepted the challenge and chose the terrain of the battlefield. Then, his figure disappeared. Lu Yi appeared in the battlefield, which was only a few dozen feet in radius. This terrain was especially suitable for a weapon cultivator. The moment the white light in his field of vision dissipated, Lu Yi saw a body cultivator on the other side of the battlefield, holding a large shield made of spiritual power and wearing a thick armor. His spiritual power and blood chi mixed together to form a barrier. This bastard had actually used all of his defensive measures before he came in. Lu Yi didn't know which sect he came from. Just as he was sizing up his surroundings, he felt an enormous pressure coming from the front. Looking up, he saw Lu Yi leaving behind an afterimage as he rushed toward him. In front of him, there were 9 rays of light from Imperial equipment opening a path for him. The body cultivator didn't dare to be careless. There were so many experts on the spirit stream list that had been killed by this guy. He was still much weaker than them. Therefore, he made a prompt decision. With an angry roar, he slammed his large shield into the ground and squatted down. In an instant, a heavy aura lingered around his body, giving him a feeling of being as immovable as a mountain. Just as he got into a defensive posture, the 9 rays of light arrived in front of him. Ding ding dang dang, crack, the body cultivator's heart turned cold. Looking at his large shield, he saw the 9 restrictions spiritual artifact shatter into pieces that filled the sky. An aura of death rushed toward him. Although he still had the armor to protect his body, it was rumored that Lu Yi was the best at killing people. The armor could only protect his body, and not his neck. Just as he was about to open his mouth, Hu Po, who was crouching on Lu Yi's shoulder, opened his mouth and roared. The powerful impact made the body cultivator feel dizzy, and he swallowed the words that were about to come out of his mouth. So that's how it is. So this was the reason why Lu Yi could make those experts on the spirit stream list unable to admit defeat. His body became light, and his vision flipped upside down. As his consciousness became blurry, he saw Lu Yi standing beside a headless corpse with a flaming long blade in his hand. That's right, this guy was the best at killing people. Next to the body cultivator's corpse, Lu Yi shook off the blood on his long blade and sheathed it. He collected his spoils of war and left the battlefield. Just as his figure appeared in the wooden house, the battlefield imprint moved again. Lu Yi checked it and frowned. He realized that the myriad Devil Ridge seemed to have organized a group to challenge him. Otherwise, it wouldn't make sense for another challenge to come right after he finished one. He accepted the challenge and chose the same terrain as before. After a few dozen breaths, Lu Yi appeared again. Sure enough, a new challenge came, and it seemed like it would never end. Lu Yi wasn't in a hurry to devour the earthcore flame. If the myriad Devil Ridge wanted to play like this, then he could only accompany them to the end. Time passed, and one battle after another started and ended quickly. Lu Yi had never experienced such a swift battle before. It was the same battlefield, but different opponents. Battle after battle, it seemed like there was no end to it. In half a day, more than 20 body cultivators had died at Lu Yi's hands, and as time passed, this number continued to expand. The continuous battle had consumed a great deal of Lu Yi's energy, especially now that all of his challengers were body cultivators with powerful physique. Moreover, they had already activated all of their defensive means before entering the battlefield. If he wanted to kill them, he would have to break through their defenses in order to have a chance. Even Lu Yi couldn't hold back if he wanted to break the defenses of those body cultivators. The Pan Mountain Saber was chipped by him. One had to know that when Lu Yi chose this spirit treasure, he valued its weight. There were 9 spirit treasures inside, and more than half of them were used to strengthen the blade. Even so, the Pan Mountain saber couldn't bear the weight anymore. Fortunately, Lu Yi didn't rely on the sharpness of the spirit weapon to kill his opponents, so as long as it wasn't broken, he could still use it. Chapter 396. In the arena, Lu Yi held the hilt of his saber as he stood at a vantage point. His cheeks puffed up as he chewed on the spirit pills in his mouth. He casually took a few bites and swallowed them down, recovering his spiritual power. Then, he took out a large piece of good quality honey and ate it. The honey he brought from the hidden fog mountain could not only recover spiritual power, but also physical strength. It was perfect for him to use. The arena, which spanned several dozen meters, was locked in a fierce battle. Yi and Hu Po went up against a Heavenly 9 physique cultivator. Lu Yi had been fighting for half a day, and he had used up too much energy, so he simply let Yi and Hu Po take his place. Yi had not fought before, so she had long been itching to fight. With Yi's current ability, it would be very difficult for her to win against a Heavenly 9 physique cultivator. However, with Hu Po assisting her, it was different. The spirit and tiger were born together, and their minds were connected. Their cooperation was flawless. Hu Po was responsible for restraining the enemy's energy and attention, while Yi used her magical techniques to attack. Even if he could not win against his opponent for a while, the physique cultivator did not have the chance to admit defeat. Whenever he dared to open his mouth, Hu Po would let out a tiger's roar. Hu Po's roar was an innate ability that targeted the soul and mind. In Immortal Origin City, it had absorbed a lot of soul fog, causing the might of its roar to become even greater. Up until now, none of the Spirit Stream Realm cultivators he had encountered could withstand the tiger's roar's mental deterrence. After fighting for a long time, the physique cultivator's mentality exploded. He could not win and he could not escape. He did not even have the chance to open his mouth and admit defeat. There was also Lu Yi standing on the side, eyeing him covetously. He felt that he was going to die here. Why? The Spirit Stream list challenges had always been one-on-one battles. Why would a weapon cultivator bring a pet beast with him? It was fine if he had a pet beast, but what was up with that female spell cultivator? It was supposed to be a one-on-one battle, but now it was 1 against 3. No wonder so many fellow Taoists who had challenged Lu Yi had died. In this kind of environment, who would have a good ending when they were outnumbered? He was filled with unwillingness, but there was nothing he could do. He wanted to send this information out, but this was the arena, and there was no way to send a message. After fighting for a full hour, the body cultivator finally staggered and fell to the ground. His entire body was covered with the scars of spells, making him look terrible. Yi cheered and stepped forward to collect the spoils of war. She picked up the other party's storage bag and held it in front of Lu Yi like it was a treasure. I won. Lu Yi rubbed her head and took the storage bag. You've worked hard. Do you still want to fight? Fight. Yi's gaze was firm. She rarely had the chance to temper her combat skills like this. Back when she followed Lu Yi, she was mostly surrounded by a large group of people. Now that she had taken advantage of the myriad Devil Ridges cultivators to challenge Lu Yi, this kind of tempering would help her grow tremendously. Of course, the prerequisite was that she needed Hu Po to cooperate with her. Otherwise, she wouldn't be able to defeat those Tianjiu cultivators by herself. The moment they left the battle arena, the next challenge had already arrived. Lu Yi accepted it and waited for an hour for Yi and Hu Po to recover a little before entering the battle arena. This abnormal situation quickly attracted the attention of the cultivators of the Leaf League, including the previous battle. Ever since the Leaf League started to continuously challenge Lu Yi, he would immediately accept every challenge and enter the battle arena, which would end very quickly. However, the battle just now had lasted for an hour. This time, he delayed the challenge for another hour before accepting it. What did this mean? This undoubtedly meant that Lu Yi had expended a lot of energy and was no longer at his peak, which was why he made such a choice. This made the cultivators of the Leaf League see hope, and they couldn't help but feel excited. After about an hour, the battle ended. A new challenge began. After several consecutive battles, Yi was exhausted, and Hu Po was also a little listless. "Lu Yi, I can't take it anymore. You do it yourself." After Yi finished speaking, she hid inside Hu Po's body to recover. In the wooden house, Lu Yi fed Hu Po some spirit pills and accepted the challenge from the unknown cultivator. Then, he strangely discovered that the person who challenged him this time wasn't a body cultivator, but a weapon cultivator. He didn't know if it was because too many body cultivators from the myriad Devil Ridge had been killed or something. After the opponent appeared, he hurriedly looked at Lu Yi. Then, he saw Lu Yi rushing towards him with an imposing aura, and his face changed greatly. The situation was a little different from what he had imagined. Lu Yi's body was intact, and he was full of energy. He wasn't an arrow at the end of its flight as he had expected. After a while, the cultivators of the Leaf League were stunned. Lu Yi had actually recovered his previous killing speed, ending a battle almost every 10 breaths. All the people who had challenged him had died, and no one knew what was going on with him. The hope that they had just seen was ruthlessly extinguished by a basin of cold water. Half a day later, Lu Yi waited in the wooden house for a long time, but he didn't see any new challenges. They didn't dare to challenge him. In the past 2 days, because of the challenges to Lu Yi, the Leaf League had lost more than 100 cultivators, and more than half of them were body cultivators. However, even with such a high-intensity challenge, they couldn't see any hope of winning against Lu Yi. If they continued to challenge him, they would just be throwing their lives away. Only now did the cultivators of the Leaf League react. Even if their previous actions had been effective, and they had driven Lu Yi out of the spirit stream list, what was the point? They couldn't kill him, and only driving him out of the list didn't seem to be a big loss for him. When they thought about it, they suddenly felt that the more than 100 people killed by Lu Yi in the past 2 days had all died in vain. How sad! Lu Yi was now at the bottom of the list, in the position of 100, which was the same as the first place. It was extremely conspicuous. He wasn't in a hurry to reach a higher rank, but took out the 20 pieces of earth core fire. After 2 days of delay, he finally had time to deal with it. Urging the innate skill tree, Lu Yi devoured the pieces of earth core fire one by one. Then, he nervously looked at the dozen symmetrical leaves and calculated their burning progress. After devouring a total of 18 pieces of earth core fire, the dozen leaves suddenly all burned. Lu Yi's nervous mood relaxed. After devouring the remaining 2 pieces of earth core fire, Lu Yi focused his mind on the dozen leaves. Boom! His mind shook slightly, and his consciousness suddenly scattered. It was as if his soul had left his body. Then, a huge amount of information poured into his mind uncontrollably, followed by an indescribable pain. Lu Yi's face suddenly turned pale. But he didn't faint. Perhaps because he had received a powerful impact from the Fire Phoenix Spirit Rune before, or because his soul was tough enough, the impact this time was not to the extent of making him faint. Lu Yi would rather faint. At least he didn't have to experience this unbearable pain. After a long time, he slowly recovered. Shaking his head slightly, he felt that his whole brain was shaking, as if it was about to fall out of his head. In this state, the strength he could exert was greatly reduced. Unfortunately, no one from the myriad Devil Ridge dared to challenge him. They were all scared of being killed. Closing his eyes, he digested the huge amount of information. Lu Yi's expression gradually turned to joy. With the experience of the Fire Phoenix Spirit Rune, when he saw the dozen symmetrical leaves, he felt that these leaves looked like a pair of wings, so he couldn't wait to verify it. In the end, he even extorted 20 pieces of earth core fire from Bailon. As it turned out, he was right. This new spirit rune was the flying wings he had once obtained. Before the battle at Spirit Creek, Madame Yun had bestowed upon him and Hua Si the flying wing tattoo on their back. This tattoo had only lost its effect a while ago in the Land of Fire. It had been of great help to Lu Yi on many occasions, allowing him to escape with his life many times. Since this flying wing rune lost its effect, Lu Yi missed it very much, especially when he was chased by many cultivators from the myriad Devil Ridge. If he had the flying wing rune, his speed would undoubtedly be faster and his body would be more agile, so he wouldn't be in such a sorry state. But even with Madame Yun's help, bestowing the flying wing rune consumed a lot of energy. It required the blood essence of a bird-type great demon. The materials used last time were prepared by the sect master. Lu Yi originally planned to wait until he had accumulated more merit points, go to the Tianji treasure house to see if there was any suitable great demon blood for sale, and then ask Madame Yun to help him tattoo the flying wing rune. But now there was no need. Lu Yi had already mastered this spirit rune and could activate it at any time. Compared to the flying wing rune with a time limit, it was undoubtedly better. He just didn't know how much energy it would consume. With this thought, Lu Yi flashed out of the wooden house and arrived at an open space. With a slight thought, the spirit power around him surged, and flames flowed behind him. In an instant, a pair of fiery red spirit power wings spread out over 10 meters. Turning his head to look, this pair of wings built with his own spirit power as the foundation was undoubtedly more majestic than the flying wing rune from before. The consumption also seemed to be greater. Lu Yi thought for a moment and withdrew a little of his spirit power, and the fiery red wings on his back also became smaller. In the next instant, his entire body turned into a ball of fire and soared into the sky, flapping his wings. He didn't leave the range of the poisonous miasma, so he didn't fly high. The fiery red figure passed through the poisonous miasma and the poisonous miasma. After the time it took to brew a cup of tea, the fiery red figure descended from the sky and landed in front of the wooden house. Lu Yi half squatted, and the wings flowing with spirit power on his back slowly withdrew. After some testing, Lu Yi had a deeper understanding of this spirit rune. In terms of consumption, it was more than enhancing the flight spirit tool. Even if he had tried his best to shrink the size of the wings, this consumption was inevitable. However, compared to imperial flying, using the flying wing rune was undoubtedly more agile and faster. Previously, when he was chased by a large group of cultivators from the myriad Devil Ridge after killing his way out of the myriad poison forest, if he had the flying wing rune, he would have long left those guys behind. It could be said that with the flying wing rune, as long as Lu Yi had sufficient spirit power, he would no longer have to worry about being chased in the future. Chapter 397. Cultivators in the spirit stream realm could only fly on spiritual tools. Only when they reached the Cloud River realm could they fly. The two were different concepts. One allowed one to fly on a flying spirit tool, while the other allowed one to fly with one's physical body. Although Lu Yi had borrowed the power of the flying wing spirit tattoo, he had just experienced the benefits of flying in advance. Of course, that didn't mean that cultivators didn't need flying spirit tools after reaching the Cloud River realm. They still needed them because flying on a flying spirit tool consumed less energy. Furthermore, some flying spirit tools could be installed with spirit stones and other consumables to replace the cultivator's own spirit power. This was especially true for large flying spirit tools, which usually relied on spirit stones and formations to operate. It was very difficult to rely on the cultivator's own spirit power to operate them. After obtaining the flying wing spirit tattoo, Lu Yi was in a good mood. Coupled with the fact that the battle had been quite intense, Lu Yi decided to rest for a day. The spirit stream battlefield had a rare day of peace. There weren't many changes on the spirit stream ranking, and there weren't many disturbances on the battlefield. Once upon a time, such a large battlefield could be peaceful because of one person's silence. The myriad Devil Ridge cultivators sadly discovered that as long as sect exterminating Yi didn't jump out to cause trouble, the battlefield was still very peaceful. However, this peace was broken in a short day. One day later, Lu Yi began to rush up the ranking. On the spirit stream ranking, his ranking rose by a few places every few breaths of time. All of the myriad Devil Ridge cultivators who were challenged by him refused without exception. Although it was humiliating, it was better than losing their lives. So many Heavenly Nine cultivators had been killed by him, and the myriad Devil Ridge cultivators who were near the bottom of the spirit stream ranking didn't have the confidence to survive Lu Ye's attack. Last time, Lu Yi had specifically targeted the myriad Devil Ridge cultivators. He hadn't let go of any of the myriad Devil Ridge cultivators who ranked higher than him. This time, he couldn't do it. Between the 50th and 80th places, almost all of them were from the Grand Heaven Alliance. Only after the 80th place were there a few myriad Devil Ridge cultivators. If Lu Yi wanted to climb higher on the Spirit Stream ranking, he could only choose to challenge some of the Grand Heaven Alliance cultivators. There was nothing he could do about it. Fortunately, the Grand Heaven Alliance cultivators could understand. In just an hour's time, Lu Yi had returned to the top 50 of the Spirit Stream list. This kind of ranking speed was unprecedented. At this point, there were many targets for him to challenge. Just like before, Lu Yi specifically looked for cultivators from the Myriad Demons Ridge and challenged them one by one. It had to be said that even though Lu Ye's previous battle record was astonishing, the experts ranked in the top 50 all had their own pride. That was why when Lu Yi had first challenged them, no one had refused. Because they all had the right to be arrogant. In such a large battlefield, there were tens of millions of Spirit Stream Realm cultivators. To be able to rank in the top 50, their strength was naturally not weak. Lu Yi didn't deal with these people like he had dealt with Bai Lan. Firstly, he didn't urgently need the Earth Core Fire for the time being. Secondly, he had accumulated a lot of merit points. If he really needed the Earth Core Fire, he could buy it himself. Thirdly, it would be a waste of time. 10 days had passed since he had started to attack the Spirit Stream list. Therefore, he needed to reach his limit as soon as possible. That way, he would be able to obtain even more benefits when Heaven's Secret bestowed him with rewards. If he used the same method he had used on Bai Lan to deal with these people, he wouldn't be able to obtain any benefit. Even if he succeeded, the gains wouldn't make up for the losses. Any one of them, as long as they did it properly, could waste several days of his time. Therefore, he only had one goal now, and that was to attack the list. Because he was the one who had issued the challenge, the terrain was chosen by others. However, even if the terrain was suitable for them, they still couldn't escape death. After Lu Yi had challenged 3 people and killed all 3, even the experts ranked in the top 50 realized that things were not going well. They had thought that the cultivators ranked below the 50th place were too weak and couldn't even shout out the words to admit defeat. But now, it seemed that it wasn't that they were weak, but that Lu Yi had some special method that prevented the people he challenged from shouting out the words to admit defeat. The premise of accepting Lu Yi's challenge was that they could still live if they couldn't win. If it was a certain death, then they would have to consider it carefully. No one would be so stubborn as to seek death. Unfortunately, they couldn't figure out what method Lu Yi had used. Of all the Myriad Demons Ridge cultivators who had encountered Lu Yi in the battlefield, only one had survived. That was Bai Lan of the Moistening Rain sect. Previously, some people had asked Bai Lan for information about Lu Yi. Now they had even more information. However, Bai Lan couldn't say why. She had been completely suppressed in the battle with Lu Yi, and even the protection of her high-grade spirit artifact had almost been broken. Combined with the situation of that battle, Bai Lan had a chance to admit defeat. Therefore, Lu Yi must have some method that he hadn't used on Bai Lan. This made the cultivators of the Myriad Demons Ridge suspicious. They secretly wondered if Lu Yi was a person who had tender feelings for women. Otherwise, why would he treat Bai Lan so differently? However, it wasn't as if there were no beautiful women on the Spirit Stream list. Besides Bailan, he had killed all of them. How could Bailan survive? Compared to the other female cultivators who had been killed, Bailan's only advantage was that she had a grand heart and proud capital. For a time, many people seemed to understand the truth. It was worth mentioning that after Luia had started fighting, Bailan had also started fighting. However, the speed at which the two of them fought was on a completely different level. After all, Luyi had risen from the 100th to the 50th without experiencing a single battle. He had been directly rejected by his challengers and smoothly promoted. Bailan didn't have such a great deterrent force. After fighting one battle after another, her speed naturally couldn't be that fast. However, she already had the foundation of being ranked 48. If she went all out, her final ranking shouldn't be too bad. Inside the wooden house, Luya's mind was connected to the spirit stream list, and he challenged them one by one. After he had killed 3 powerhouses ranked in the top 50, the cultivators of the Myriad Demons Ridge all chose to reject his next few challenges. This caused his ranking to soar to 36. The next person he challenged was Zhuo Jianchen, who was ranked 34th. This name was somewhat familiar. Lu Yi looked at his sect and saw that it was the Moistening Rain sect. Suddenly, he remembered that this was the man who had said that he would be waiting for him a few days ago. It seemed that he was Bailan's senior brother. Lu Yi issued a challenge, and as expected, the other party accepted it. Lu Yi waited quietly. In the Moistening Rain sect, Bailan looked at the depressed Zhuo Jianchen in front of her. Senior brother, did Lu Yi challenge you? Yes. I accept. Senior brother, is it okay to refuse? Zhuo Jianchen suddenly turned his head. Why should I refuse? What are you afraid of? Bailan was a little confused. What? She didn't know why, but her senior brother was a little strange today. Her usually gentle and refined senior brother was now giving her an extremely gloomy feeling. Zhuo Jianchen suppressed the sullenness in his heart and asked in a deep voice, Junior sister, let me ask you. Why did Lu Yi only let you go? He didn't let me go. He extorted 20 earthen core flames from me. That's worth 4,000 merit points. Zhuo Jianchen said. All the fellow Taoists from the Myriad Demons Ridge who accepted his challenge died. Only you survived. Did he only ask you for 20 earthen core flames? Bailan also felt that something was wrong. She looked at Zhuo Jianchen in surprise. Senior brother, what are you trying to say? I don't want to say anything. It's just that I heard something. How could Zhuo Jianchen not care about the rumors and slanders that were flying around outside? He didn't think too much about it at first, but when he recalled the scene where his junior sister returned after fighting with Lu Yi, he couldn't help but let his imagination run wild. A few days ago, when his junior sister returned from the battle arena, her face was extremely pale, as if she had suffered a great humiliation. In the encampment, many of his junior brothers and sisters looked at him strangely. Bailan's face suddenly turned pale. She had naturally heard the rumors, but how could she take them seriously? Senior brother, do you believe? I don't know whether to believe it or not. Zhuo Jianchen interrupted Bailan. So I will ask him face to face. Senior brother, you can't go. So many people died. Bailan was frightened and worried. However, the more frightened and worried she was, the deeper the thorn in Zhuo Jianchen's heart. The more he wanted to find Lu Yi and ask him. If he didn't get to the bottom of this matter, he wouldn't feel at ease for the rest of his life. All right, I'm going to prepare for this battle. Zhuo Jianchen turned around and waved his sleeve, closing the door behind him. Bailan stood there in a daze, her eyes blank. She really couldn't understand how things had developed to this point. Lu Yi, it's all his fault. Bailan gritted her teeth, wishing she could tear that man to pieces, but when his face appeared in her mind, she couldn't help shivering. She pounded on the door and shouted, Senior brother, listen to me. However, there was no response. After choosing the terrain of the battle arena, the scenery in front of Zhuo Jianchen began to change. In an average-sized battlefield, Lu Yi and Zhuo Jianquan's figures appeared at the same time. As usual, Yi immediately dove into the ground to search for traces of the enemy. Meanwhile, Hu Po was crouching on Lu Ye's shoulder, motionless like a decoration. Lu Ye didn't have time to look around when he heard a shout from the front, "Lu Ye, get out here!" He looked up and saw a sword light floating in the air in front of him. A figure was standing on top of the sword light, giving off a sense of elegance. Moreover, there were many sword lights floating around this person, each of them a flying sword. Looking at this person's appearance, there was no doubt that he was a sword cultivator. But for some reason, this person looked angry. Lu Ye suspected it had something to do with the 20 earth core fires he had extorted from his junior sister. So many people had refused his challenge before, but this person had accepted it. It seemed that not only was he confident in his strength, he was also a stubborn person. Lu Ye liked this kind of person. Chapter 398. In the arena, Lu Yi summoned his spirit boat and flew up to Zhuo Jianquan's position, which was a few dozen feet away. Although his journey had been very smooth, Lu Yi would never underestimate his opponents, especially when the one in front of him was most likely a sword cultivator. The fact that his opponent was ranked 32nd showed that he was quite capable. Their eyes met, and Zhuo Jianquan angrily asked, "Lu Ye, what did you do to my junior sister?" Lu Yi thought for a moment. He had pushed Bai Lan from 48th to 97th place, and had even extorted the Earth Flame, which was worth 4,000 merit points. Did he really go overboard? But then again, that woman should be thanking him for not killing her. If he hadn't been in a hurry to get the Earth Flame, that woman would have been dead already. Compared to his life, what did falling on the spirit stream list and losing some treasures mean? His junior sister had been bullied, and his senior brother had come to her rescue. Lu Ye's silence made Zhuo Jianquan even angrier, and his face turned green. He gritted his teeth and said, "Fine, since you have nothing to say, then die." As soon as he finished speaking, 7 flying swords of different lengths appeared beside Zhuo Jianquan. They emitted a burst of sword light as they shot toward Lu Yi. In the blink of an eye, they had arrived in front of him. The flying swords of sword cultivators were extremely fast, and their killing power was also very strong, which was why sword cultivators could kill enemies above their level. Lu Yi didn't know much about sword cultivators, but Zhuo Jianquan could control 7 flying swords at once, so his mind was undoubtedly much stronger than that of ordinary cultivators. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to control so many flying swords. However, there was still a big gap between him and Yu Lianzhou. According to Lu Ye's knowledge, Yu Lianzhou's limit was 20 flying swords, which was almost 3 times that of Zhuo Jianquan. He was even more incomparable to Li Baxian. The number of times Li Baxian had used sword kinesis flight in the spirit stream realm was an unbreakable record. One reason for this was his innate talent, and the other reason was that he had stayed in the spirit stream realm for far too long. For more than 10 years, he hadn't been able to increase his cultivation, so he had been strengthening his mind, which was why he could control 100 flying swords. It could be said that Li Baxian's starting point in the Cloud River tier was much higher than the average person's. When the 7 flying swords came, the weapon box at Lu Ye's waist buzzed, and 9 streams of flowing light went up to meet them. In an instant, the place where the 2 of them were standing in midair was filled with flowing light flashing incessantly. Ding-ding-dang-dang sounds could be heard incessantly, and occasionally there were scenes of sparks flying in all directions. Lu Yi was still very confident in his ability to control artifacts. After all, his soul was strong, and the power of his mind was strong as well. This greatly increased his ability to control spirit artifacts and spirit energy. Throughout the entire spirit stream battlefield, there was no one with a stronger soul than him, and there were only a handful of people who could surpass him in terms of artifact control. Zhuo Jianquan definitely wasn't one of them. In the air where the 2 of them were, imperial artifacts were colliding with each other. Under the control of the 2 of them, the spirit artifacts seemed to have a life of their own and were fighting against each other. But in just a moment, Zhuo Jianshan's flying sword was at a disadvantage and was completely suppressed. This couldn't be helped. Lu Yi had the advantage in terms of number of artifacts, and he could also enchant his artifacts with various spirit patterns. This was something that Zhuo Jianshan couldn't compare to. He obviously sensed that something was wrong. When his 7 flying swords were forced to close in front of him, the spiritual energy in his body suddenly surged. In an instant, the 7 flying swords, which had already been defeated, gathered together, entwined with each other, and shot out like a spinning top. As they flew, Lu Ye's artifacts were all sent flying. Sword array. Lu Yi raised an eyebrow. Although he didn't know much about the techniques of sword cultivators, he had still heard of sword arrays before. Normally, cultivators would need at least 3 people to form a sword array. However, powerful sword cultivators could form a sword array by themselves because they could control many flying swords. The might of the sword array formed by the 7 flying swords couldn't be underestimated. The sword whistled through the air, and its momentum was like thunder. In the blink of an eye, it had arrived in front of Lu Yi. Lu Ye's artifact had been sent flying, and it was too late for him to return to help. Just as the sword array arrived in front of Lu Yi, the coiling mountain saber was suddenly unsheathed. A fiery red saber light slashed down, and a powerful shock wave swept out from the front, accompanied by a cold sword intent. On the ground, Yi raised her head and saw Lu Yi holding the coiling mountain saber in front of him. In front of the saber, the sword array buzzed, pushing against his body and forcing him to retreat. Behind the sword array, Zhuo Jianshan's body had merged with the sword light, and he had become one with the sword as he attacked. Yi looked on calmly, and didn't have any intention of interfering. For Lu Yi, challenging the spirit stream list was a way to reach his limit in the shortest amount of time. At the same time, it was also a way to temper himself. Fighting with experts from various factions and fighting to the death was the best way to speed up the growth of one's strength. The opponents he had faced before were all weak and couldn't even withstand a single blow. Now that he had finally found a decent opponent, how could he interfere? 9 rays of light from the Imperial equipment attacked from the left and right. Zhuo Jianshan, who had merged with the sword light, felt the killing intent in the first moment. The long sword in his hand continuously blocked the incoming Imperial equipment. However, the huge impact caused his wrist to go numb. He was secretly shocked that Lu Yi was only a weapon cultivator, so how could his Imperial equipment be so fast and powerful? The moment he was distracted, a flaw appeared in the sword array. Lu Yi withdrew his saber and thrust it forward, and the coiling mountain saber pierced through the flaw in the sword array. Violent spiritual energy swept out, and the sword array immediately collapsed, turning into rays of light that shot out in all directions. Lu Yi's figure paused, and in the next moment, he pounced on Zhuo Jianshan like a fierce tiger descending from a mountain. The saber and sword collided, and an ear-piercing sound of friction rang out. In the air, the 2 figures were less than 3 meters away from each other, and they stared at each other. One's eyes were spitting fire, as if there was an irreconcilable hatred between them, while the other's expression was calm. Zhuo Jianshan clenched his teeth and shouted, "I'm going to kill you!" Before the battle began, he was actually very worried because so far, none of the myriad Devil Ridge cultivators who had accepted Lu Yi's challenge had had a good ending. However, after the battle began, he discovered that the outside world had overestimated Lu Yi. Admittedly, this guy did have some strength, otherwise, he wouldn't have been qualified to challenge him, but that was it. Zhuo Jianshan even felt that if he worked a little harder, he could defeat Lu Yi. If that was the case, then he would be able to win glory for the myriad Devil Ridge and his sect. With a roar, Zhuo Jianshan pointed his sword and sword flowers shot towards Lu Yi. The shining saber light cut through the sky, and the sword flowers that filled the sky dissipated. Zhuo Jianshan felt a chill on his chest and instinctively took a few steps back. He looked at Lu Yi in surprise and then looked down at his chest. There was actually a bloody wound on his chest. Lu Yi's saber had been so fast that he hadn't been able to react. You! Zhuo Jianchen suddenly began to doubt himself. He had thought that Lu Yi was only SOSO, but now that Lu Yi had suddenly attacked, he immediately realized a serious problem. Could it be that what he had seen before was Lu Yi's full strength? He hadn't considered that before, mainly because he hadn't expected that someone would hold back when challenging the spirit stream list. As soon as he finished speaking, a figure flashed in front of him. Lu Yi, who had been dozens of feet away, was now in front of him. Facing the saber, Zhuo Jianchen could only block it with his sword. A vast and irresistible force swept over from above. Zhuo Jianchen's body and the air transportation spiritual tool under his feet crashed to the ground like meteors falling from the sky. With a loud bang, dust flew everywhere. Zhuo Jianchen struggled to his feet, blood flowing from the corner of his mouth. He felt as if all the bones in his body were about to fall apart. His eyes were filled with disbelief, as if he couldn't understand how he couldn't even block Lu Yi's saber. Moreover, the sudden burst of power from Lu Yi was simply shocking. Beside his feet was his air transportation spiritual tool, but under such an impact, it was basically scrapped. After all, air transportation spiritual tools didn't have much defensive power. He staggered a few steps and looked up, but didn't see Lu Yi's figure. Just as he was about to raise his guard, he heard footsteps coming from the side. Turning around, he saw Lu Yi walking over with the mountain plate saber in his hand. Lu Yi's pace wasn't fast, but there was a boundless pressure weighing down on Zhuo Jianchen's heart, making it difficult for him to breathe. Zhuo Jianchen raised his sword, pointed it at Lu Yi and shouted, "Why didn't you use your full strength at the beginning?" Only now did he realize that Lu Yi hadn't used his full strength at the beginning, which gave him the illusion that he could beat this person if he tried. What was this? Wasn't humiliating his junior sister enough? Was he trying to humiliate him too? After hearing Zhuo Jianchen's words, Lu Yi didn't want to respond. However, after thinking for a moment, he said, "I wanted to see the strength of those ranked around the 30th place." He hadn't had a chance to fight in the previous battles, as he had been directly rejected by the cultivators of the Myriad Devil Ridge. As a result, he only had a rough idea of the strength of the cultivators ranked around the 50th place. Since Zhuo Jianchen had finally accepted his challenge, he naturally had to hold back. What's the result? I'm a bit disappointed. The corners of Zhuo Jianchen's eyes twitched violently. Just as he was about to say something, he saw Lu Yi's body surging with spiritual power as he rushed toward him. I roar. Under the tiger's roar, Zhuo Jianchen only had time to spit out a single word before his head felt as if it had been hit by a hammer, and he suddenly became dizzy. However, he was still a sword cultivator, and the fact that he could control 7 swords showed that his mind was stronger than that of ordinary spirit stream stage cultivators. Therefore, Hu Po's roar didn't affect him as much as the others. I admit defeat. As soon as Zhuo Jianchen regained consciousness, he shouted these 2 words. However, Lu Yi's figure had already disappeared, leaving only the sound of a saber sheathing behind him. Zhuo Jianchen sighed softly and looked up at the clouds in the sky. He muttered, "So that's how it is." So this was the reason why Lu Yi had been able to prevent the cultivators of the Myriad Devil Ridge from admitting defeat. Although he had shouted it, it was still a bit too late. On the spirit stream list, the 34th name trembled slightly before disappearing, replaced by the name of Lu Yi from the Jade Blood sect. Chapter 399. Zhuo Jianchen from the Moistening Rain sect, who was ranked 34th, had been killed by Lu Yi. This news spread rapidly throughout the battlefield and even the 9 regions as if it had wings. Everyone was shocked. When Lu Yi had challenged the 10,000 Devil Ridge, none of the cultivators ranked below 50th had survived. It could be explained by Lu Yi's strength being so strong that he could kill them in an instant, causing them to not even have the chance to admit defeat. But now? Zhujianshan, who was ranked 34th, was not weak. How could he not even have the chance to admit defeat? Not to mention that he was a sword cultivator. It was impossible for Zhujianshan to fight Lu Ye to the death. No one would be so stupid. Countless people continued to pay attention. Everyone was curious. What was Lu Ye's limit? Top 20? Top 10? Or could he reach the top of the list? Especially the cultivators from the 10,000 Devil Ridge, who were ranked above Lu Ye on the Spirit Stream list. After killing Zhujianshan, Lu Ye's name from the Jade Blood sect quickly rose again. In less than half a cup of tea's time, he had risen from 34th to 20th. The cultivators from the 10,000 Devil Ridge, who were challenged by him, directly refused. Zhujianshan had been killed by Lu Ye, and they were not much stronger than Zhujianshan. Naturally, they would not take the risk to accept the challenge. However, it was impossible for the Spirit Stream list to continue smoothly. The higher the ranking, the more arrogant they were. Most of them had a kind of self-confidence that said, "Just because others can't, doesn't mean I can't." Therefore, when Lu Ye chose to challenge the 17th ranked cultivator, his opponent accepted the challenge without hesitation. Lu Ye did not have to wait for long. 10 breaths after Lu Ye issued the challenge, the two of them appeared in the arena. From this, it could be seen that his opponent had been waiting for Lu Ye to challenge him, so he had made ample preparations. This arena was the kind of terrain that Lu Ye liked the most. It was not large, so he did not have to spend any effort to find the enemy's tracks. It was suitable for close combat. Looking up, Lu Ye saw a burly man with bronze skin standing in the arena. He was as tall as an iron tower, and his body was full of muscles. He was undoubtedly a body cultivator. What caught Lu Ye's attention the most was that he had 2 curved horns on his forehead. Not only that, his upper body, chest, waist, and even his arms had colorful tattoos. Was this a dominant tattoo? There were millions of cultivators in the 9 regions, and each of them had a different personality. Some were reserved, some were passionate, and some were like the body cultivator in front of him, who liked to show off. The visible tattoos on his body were enough to show that he was not someone to be trifled with. If he were to encounter a slightly weaker cultivator, just looking at these visible tattoos would create a huge psychological pressure because no one knew what kind of miraculous effects those tattoos would have. Looking at the 2 curved horns on the other party's forehead, Lu Ye guessed that the other party should be a Yao cultivator. Most Yao cultivators were full of vitality and were naturally suited to be body cultivators. The other party was even equipped with bracers on his arms and boxing gloves with barbs on his fists. Whether it was the bracers or the boxing gloves, they were clearly spirit artifacts of good quality. This was the first time Lu Ye had encountered a body cultivator who didn't use a shield-type spirit artifact. He immediately concluded that this guy wasn't easy to kill. This kind of body cultivator did not focus on defense. Instead, like weapon cultivators, they were more inclined towards offense. In addition, their skin was rough and their flesh was thick, so they were very difficult to deal with. "Are you that Lu Ye?" the Yao cultivator shouted. The weapon box on Lu Ye's waist shook, and a stream of light greeted the other party. In the blink of an eye, the Imperial equipment arrived in front of him. The Yao cultivator just raised his hand and waved it, and with a clanking sound, Lu Ye's Imperial equipment was blocked. However, after blocking one, there was a second, and then a third. The clanking sound was endless. The Yao cultivator's arms were constantly waving, relying on the bracers on his arms to send the Imperial equipment flying. In a moment, he was annoyed. "You've gone too far, do you dare to come over?" Lu Ye was expressionless. He only used his Imperial equipment to attack. From time to time, the Imperial equipment would burst out with spiritual light, and various types of spiritual inscriptions would be added to it. The Yao cultivator was overwhelmed. He looked even angrier. Several times, he wanted to break through the blockade of the Imperial equipment and kill Lu Ye, but he was forced back. However, it had to be said that although this guy was big, His movements were extremely agile. Lu Yi used 9 imperial equipment, but not a single one could hurt him. Moreover, Lu Yi keenly noticed that this guy looked extremely angry, but in fact, his eyes were calm. The so-called anger was just a facade. "Ah, I'm so angry, I'm going to kill you." Entangled by the streams of light from the imperial equipment, the Yao cultivator roared. The tattoo on his chest suddenly shone brightly, and a blood-red head of an unknown beast suddenly appeared, roaring in front of him. The roar was so loud that it was deafening. Lu Ye's 9 imperial equipment were all shaken by the impact. Taking advantage of this opportunity, the Yao cultivator took a big step forward and crashed toward Lu Yi like a mountain. Soon, he was in front of Lu Yi and punched. Lu Yi leaped and nimbly dodged the attack. In midair, he unsheathed the mountain blade and slashed at the back of the Yao cultivator's neck. However, at this moment, the seemingly clumsy figure turned around at an unimaginable speed. Wearing a glove, his fist met the mountain blade. At the same time, his other hand opened and aimed at Lu Yi. Spirit force violently surged in his palm, and a small disc formed by spirit force appeared in his palm. This was the sign that he was about to use a spell. No one would have guessed that such a burly body cultivator with a reckless temperament would also be a cultivator of spells. Furthermore, judging from the speed at which he was casting spells, his talent in spells was definitely not too low. The Yao cultivator's eyes revealed a trace of mockery. On the surface, it looked like a reckless attack that exposed his weakness, but in reality, it was just a bait. Basically, no one could defend against this move of his. When he was fighting for the leaderboard previously, many cultivators from the Grand Heaven Alliance were killed by him just like that. With a bang, the mountain blade collided with the Yao cultivator's iron fist. In an instant, the Yao cultivator's expression froze. He felt as if a mountain was pressing down on his shoulder. His legs bent and he almost knelt on the ground. At the same time, Lu Ye's figure was also sent flying. The strength of the Yao cultivator's punch was incomparably great. As he squatted down, the Yao cultivator immediately adjusted his center of gravity. The spell he had prepared in his other hand was aimed at Lu Ye's flying body. An attack formed by a mixture of spirit force and qi and blood force struck Lu Ye's chest. This directly blasted Lu Yi to the edge of the battle stage, and he slowly slid down. The huge pressure on his shoulder disappeared. The Yao cultivator stood up and looked at Lu Yi, who was unscathed and standing steadily again. The corners of his eyes twitched. He had long heard that the Jade Blood Sex Lu Yi could activate a defensive spirit pattern in battle. Today, he finally saw it with his own eyes. In that instant, his spell did hit Lu Yi, but before that, he clearly saw a spirit pattern barrier suddenly appear and block his attack. Therefore, although Lu Yi looked a little embarrassed at the moment, he was actually not injured. Dozens of feet away, the Yao cultivator grinned. As a body cultivator, it's reasonable for you to be proficient in several spells, isn't it? Lu Yi nodded silently. Holding his blade, he lowered his eyes and walked towards the Yao cultivator step by step. The figure dozens of feet away suddenly became blurry, leaving behind a string of afterimages. The Yao cultivator's expression changed greatly. He had never seen anyone in the spirit stream realm who could have such a strange speed. He hurriedly activated his eyesight, trying to see Lu Ye's figure clearly. Seeing a flash of blade light, he hurriedly raised his arms in front of his body. No attack fell. Instead, he felt a strong wave of spirit force coming from behind him. He hurriedly turned around and waved his arm. With a clang, the Pan Mountain saber landed on the bracer. Sparks flew, and the feeling of a mountain pressing down on him came again. The Yao cultivator forcibly stabilized his body, but before he could stand up straight, a scorching heat swept over him. In his vision, a beautiful fire phoenix rushed over. Before it even got close, the Yao cultivator already felt the unbearable heat. Yes, this Lu Yi was also proficient in spells. Moreover, the other party's casting speed and power were superior to his own. Flames soared into the sky and wrapped around the Yao cultivator. A powerful chi and blood burst out, tearing the fire phoenix apart, revealing the Yao cultivator's strong figure. However, before he could see the situation around him, another blade slashed down. He hurriedly blocked it, but the fire phoenix enveloped him again. One blade, one spell, one blade, one spell, it seemed to be endless. As far as the eye could see, the Yao cultivator's body was constantly standing up and squatting down, enduring the attacks of the Pan Mountain blade and the fire phoenix spell again and again. He wanted to run, but Lu Yi didn't give him a chance to escape. The beast cultivator was furious. Although his physique was strong enough, he couldn't hold on against such an unreasonable opponent. He was annoyed for a moment. Body cultivators were just using the means of body cultivators. What kind of technique were they using to tease others? Great, he had obviously pissed off Lu Yi. He felt that he was going to die. Crash, when the sound rang out, the Yao cultivator's blood was really cold. The arm guard on his wrist was cut into pieces. He hurriedly activated the power of the spirit tattoo on his chest. When the roar of a beast sounded, a powerful impact swept out in all directions. Taking advantage of this opportunity, he hurriedly pulled away and gasped for breath. On the battle stage, the two figures stood 100 feet apart from each other. There was not a single hair left on the demonic cultivator's body. All the hair on his body had been burned away. Lu Ye's gaze turned to his abdomen and arms. The tattoos on these two places didn't seem right. Can I play with them? The Yao cultivator flew into a rage out of humiliation. What's there to see? Of the tattoos all over his body, only the one on his chest was a real tattoo. The rest were just decorations. However, this kind of tattoo was no different from a real tattoo. When exposed like this, it would easily create a psychological pressure. Chapter 400. Lu Yi hadn't used his full strength before for two reasons. First, he was on guard against the tattoos that the opponent hadn't used yet. Second, he wanted to test the strength of the top 20 cultivators. Now that he had probed the opponent's strength, he knew that the tattoos were fake. Naturally, he didn't need to hold back. He squatted down slightly and pointed his saber at an angle. With the support of the wind travel spirit tattoo, he rushed forward like a bolt of lightning. As if sensing Lu Ye's killing intent, the Yao cultivator hurriedly opened his mouth. I roar! Hu Po, who hadn't made a move until now, roared. However, the soul-absorbing tiger's roar, which had always been successful, didn't play its role this time. The Yao cultivator only suffered an extremely short impact before returning to normal and hurriedly admitting defeat. Lu Yi had already rushed in front of him and brushed past him. His mountain saber was supported by the dual sharpness spirit tattoo as it slashed at the Yao cultivator's neck. However, before that, an invisible layer of protection had enveloped the Yao cultivator's body. The saber didn't cause any damage to him. It was the protection of heaven's secret. The Yao cultivator touched his neck in horror. His figure quickly faded, and he immediately left the arena. Did you let him escape? Yi revealed herself. Lu Yi nodded slightly. In fact, after his battle with Zhuo Jianchen, he had already realized this problem. The higher the ranking of the cultivators, the stronger their resistance to Hu Po's roar and the harder it was to kill them. In fact, Zhuo Jianchen had only been a step slower. The moment Lu Yi chopped off his head, he shouted out the words, "Admit defeat." This Yao cultivator was ranked 17th, a full 17 ranks higher than Zhuo Jianchen. Naturally, he was stronger than Zhuo Jianchen. He hadn't completely resisted Hu Po's tiger's roar and had only been slightly affected. Do you need my help in the next battle? He asked. Okay. Lu Yi had been challenging the spirit stream list for the past few days, so he had a clear understanding of his own strength. With his current strength, defeating the myriad Devil Ridge cultivators wasn't too difficult. However, if he wanted to challenge higher ranks, it would be difficult to kill them. If he could make a move at the right time, it would undoubtedly be a safety measure. After returning to the wooden house, Lu Yi rested for a moment before starting the next battle. At the same time, those from the Myriad Demon Ridge finally figured out the source of Lu Ye's power. His pet beast's roar could impact one's divine soul, so the Myriad Demon Ridge experts he had challenged before didn't even have the chance to admit defeat. It wasn't until the demon cultivator, who was originally ranked 17th, luckily survived Lu Ye's attack that he passed on this important information. With the experience of this demonic cultivator, the Myriad Devil Ridge cultivators ranked above him were no longer afraid. They were confident that they were not inferior to that demonic cultivator. If that demonic cultivator could survive against Lu Ye, then they could too. However, the result shocked everyone. In the next few battles, the three Myriad Demon Ridge experts ranked 16th, 14th, and 11th were all killed by Lu Ye in the arena. None of them were spared. It should be noted that the powerful warriors of the Demon's Ridge, who were ranked at this position, were all from first-rank sects. In the future, they would all have a great chance of reaching the Divine Sea Realm. Being killed by Lu Ye just like that made the experts of the other sects sigh with regret. It also intensified the hatred of the Myriad Devil Ridge towards Lu Ye. They couldn't understand why the demonic cultivator ranked 17th could survive, but the other three who were ranked higher had all died. After all, no one alive had seen Yi fight in the arena. Everyone who had seen it was already dead. With Yi secretly cooperating with them and using her magical techniques at critical moments, even if the Myriad Devil Ridge experts could block Hu Po's Tiger Roar, they would not be able to escape death. At this point, the Jade Blood sect's Lu Ye was ranked 11th on the Spirit Stream list. He only needed to move up one more place to enter the top 10. On the Spirit Stream list, the 50th place was a watershed, the 30th place was another watershed, and the 10th place was yet another watershed. The difference in strength between cultivators before and after each watershed was very obvious. If Lu Ye could really enter the top 10 of the Spirit Stream list, that would mean he had the qualifications to enter the strongest echelon of the Spirit Stream realm. The last person to enter the top 10 with a Heaven 8 cultivation base was Li Baxian. However, Li Baxian's situation was special. He originally had a Heaven 9 cultivation base, but his spiritual cavities had been destroyed, causing his cultivation base to drop. He was different from Lu Ye. If Lu Ye could enter the top 10, then he would truly be a member of the strongest echelon of the Spirit Stream realm with a Heaven 8 cultivation base. However, everyone knew that if he wanted to challenge someone, he would definitely not challenge the 10th place, because the 10th place belonged to the Grand Heaven Alliance. His next target would be the 9th place Ghost Shadow. Everyone was waiting to see if the top 10 cultivators could stop Lu Ye's advance. However, at this critical moment, Lu Ye suddenly stopped fighting. After half a day, there were no changes on the Spirit Stream list. Someone sent a message to Ghost Shadow, but Ghost Shadow said he hadn't received any news of a challenge. This caused the Myriad Devil Ridge to breathe a sigh of relief, but at the same time, worry rose in their hearts. Lu Ye obviously wouldn't stop fighting. Since there was no movement, it was clear that he was recuperating and preparing to challenge the top 10 in his best condition. In fact, this was indeed the case. Ever since he had started fighting, Lu Ye hadn't rested at all. The top 10 cultivators on the ranking board were already the strongest echelons of the Spirit Stream tier, so he naturally had to be in his best condition to face them. The strength of cultivators was not only determined by their cultivation level, but also the state of their body during battle and their ability to react on the spot. In the small courtyard outside the wooden house, Hua Si had made many strange dishes. Lu Ye didn't refuse any of them and enjoyed them to his heart's content. No matter what the ingredients were, they were all incomparably delicious. However, if one didn't have powerful detoxification methods, they wouldn't be able to enjoy Hua Si's hospitality. After eating and drinking to his heart's content, Lu Ye lay down on a chair and suddenly thought of something. He turned to look at Hua Ci. "You're not going to challenge the spirit stream list?" Although he didn't know how strong Hua Ci was now, or what kind of ridiculous methods she had to kill her enemies, from the fact that she had come here alone and killed so many myriad Devil Ridge cultivators, this woman's strength couldn't be underestimated. If he faced her, he might not even know how he died. If he had to choose between Hua Ci and the first place on the spirit stream list, he would choose the first place without hesitation. Hua Ci currently had the strength to fight on the list. "There's no rush," Hua Ci replied casually as she helped Yi clean up the dishes. "My cultivation is still lacking. Let's wait until I reach the 9th heaven." "How much are you lacking?" Lu Ye asked casually. 20 or 30 spiritual apertures." Hua Ci pursed her lips and smiled, then turned and left. The corners of Lu Ye's eyes twitched. He had discovered that Hua Ci's cultivation had been increasing at an unimaginable speed since they had come to the Myriad Poisons forest. In the past, his cultivation had been higher than Hua Ci's, but now, although they were both at the 8th heaven, the number of apertures Hua Ci had opened was higher than his. Although this was related to the fact that he had been busy fighting on the list recently and hadn't spent much time on cultivation, Lu Ye estimated that even if he cultivated with all his strength, he might not be able to catch up to her. What kind of inheritance did this woman get? After recuperating for a day, Lu Ye adjusted his body to its peak state. His mind connected to the spirit stream list, and he issued a challenge to Ghost Shadow, who was ranked 9th. Ghost Shadow accepted the challenge, and a moment later, Heaven's Secret descended. In a battlefield that covered an area of more than 10 miles, there were large trees and lush vegetation. It was the terrain of a dense forest. This place was somewhat similar to the hidden fog mountain, and was very suitable for hiding. Ghost Shadow was called Ghost Shadow, and if there were no surprises, he should be a ghost cultivator. Therefore, when he saw the terrain that Ghost Shadow had chosen, Lu Ye wasn't surprised at all. He had already set off to search for traces of Ghost Shadow. Lu Ye didn't move, but found a clean place and sat down cross-legged. He took out a few spiritual pills and threw them into his mouth, then took out a book from his storage bag. Time passed, and even though Yi had carefully searched the entire battlefield several times, she didn't find anything. It was as if Ghost Shadow had disappeared into thin air. As for Lu Ye, he had been cultivating and reading, and hadn't encountered any attacks. In the previous challenges, Lu Ye had come into contact with some ghost cultivators. However, those ghost cultivators had all hidden themselves first, then found an opportunity to sneak up on Lu Ye and launch an attack, hoping to kill him in one blow. Ghost cultivators who had such thoughts and acted on them usually died very quickly. The ghost cultivator that Lu Ye had encountered this time seemed a little different. He had hidden himself, and even Yi couldn't find any traces of him, let alone act rashly to get close to Lu Ye. However, Lu Ye was certain that Ghost Shadow was secretly observing him from not too far away, because his powerful perception could feel that he was being watched. As for where Ghost Shadow was, it was difficult to determine. Ghost Shadow was clinging to a tree branch a few dozen feet away from Lu Ye, like a ghost, quietly watching Lu Ye's figure. In this battle arena, the other party actually assumed the posture of reading a book peacefully, turning page after page in an orderly manner. This was clearly an attempt to draw him closer. As a ghost cultivator ranked at the top of the spirit stream list, Lu Ye was currently the strongest ghost cultivator in the spirit stream realm. How could he be so easily fooled? Outstanding ghost cultivators had to be able to endure loneliness, and wait for the moment when their enemies revealed their true weakness. That was when they would bare their fangs. Time slowly passed, and countless cultivators outside were waiting for the results of the battle. However, as the two sides of the battle, one was calmly reading a book and cultivating, while the other was patiently waiting, there wasn't even a single sound in the huge battlefield. The sky slowly darkened, and Liu Ye was a little surprised. He had never stayed in the battlefield for such a long time, so he didn't know that there was night in the battlefield. From the looks of it, the rumor that the battlefield belonged to some place in the 9 provinces wasn't baseless. The time here, including the time in the Spirit Stream battlefield, was the same as the time in the 9 provinces. Liu Ye rubbed his stomach, feeling a little hungry. Liu Ye put away the book in his hand, then took out a few pieces of beast meat from his storage bag. He threw half of it to Hu Po, then made a bonfire and roasted the other half. This beast meat came from the hidden fog mountain, and was the flesh of demonic beasts. Chapter 401. Gradually, a fragrant aroma filled the air, and the hot oil dripped onto the bonfire, emitting popping sounds. After eating and drinking his fill, Liu Ye continued reading. Only after midnight did he close his eyes and rest until dawn. The next day was the same. This was the most boring battle that Liu Ye had ever experienced. Up until now, he still hadn't seen his opponent, and he hadn't found any traces of him either. However, he knew that if this continued, he would definitely win. He could eat at any time to replenish his strength, but Ghost Shadow couldn't. Ghost Shadow wanted to hide, so he could only stay hidden. If he dared to do anything else, it would expose his whereabouts. However, Liu Ye didn't plan on continuing to waste time. For a cultivator like Ghost Shadow, not eating or drinking for a few days wasn't a problem. Ghost Shadow was willing to waste time, but he wasn't. Closing the book in his hand and standing up, Liu Ye casually took out a few array flags from his storage pouch and threw them in all directions. First, he used the array flags to construct the basic framework of the array, then used his spiritual energy to complete the inner structure of the array. In just a few moments, a 300-meter wide array was formed. This array didn't have much use. It was just a simple warning array. Compared to other arrays, this array was undoubtedly much simpler to set up. Furthermore, it could cover a large area, and at the same time, it didn't consume much spiritual energy. Ghost Shadow continued to hide, so Liu Ye couldn't do anything to him. This was how the Spiritual Stream List Challenge was. The Heavenly Secret Association maintained the most basic fairness, and the rest was a competition between cultivators. No one said that a competition of patience wasn't a competition. Liu Ye didn't believe that he wouldn't be able to find Ghost Shadow's traces, unless he was also proficient in arrays and knew how to avoid detection. After setting up the first warning array, Liu Ye began to set up the second, then the third and the fourth. The entire second day, Liu Ye set up the array. Fortunately, he had bought enough array flags from the Heavenly Secret Business Association. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to hold on. After an entire day, the array he set up had covered more than half of the battle arena. Ghost Shadow still hadn't shown himself. Perhaps he still had a glimmer of hope that Liu Ye didn't have enough array flags to cover the entire battle arena. That way, he would still have space to hide. Liu Ye suddenly realized that he had overlooked this point. He simply took out all the formation flags from his storage bag and placed them at his feet. Hiding in the dark, Ghost Shadow looked at the large pile of array flags and knew that he couldn't hide any longer. If he didn't hurry and find an opportunity to kill Liu Ye, his whereabouts would definitely be exposed tomorrow. After a moment of silence, Ghost Shadow's lips wriggled as he softly said something. His figure quickly disappeared from the battlefield. On the other side, Liu Ye, who was busy arranging a spirit array, paused. He actually won. He originally thought that after he revealed enough array flags, that Ghost Shadow would come to kill him tonight, but he did not expect that this fellow would be so straightforward and directly choose to admit defeat. Thinking about it, it made sense. Ghost cultivators' strength lay in their ability to silently approach their target. This method could be used to deal with ordinary people, but Ghost Shadow really didn't have the confidence to use it against Liu Ye. Who knew if this guy had set up a spirit array around him in advance? If he really tried to kill him, he would definitely fall into a trap. It could be said that when ghost cultivators' cultivation bases were not high, spirit array cultivators who were on guard were simply the bane of ghost cultivators. However, if ghost cultivators cultivated their skills to a certain level, even if it was a spirit array, they could quietly sneak in. Ghost Shadow admitted defeat and ran away. Lu Yi and Yi hurriedly packed up the spirit array flags they had set up in the battlefield. Lu Yi, if you meet this guy in the future, you must definitely kill him. He's too hateful. Yi shouted as she busied herself. Beat him half to death, then ask Hua Ci to heal him, then beat him half to death again. Lu Yi was ruthless. He would rather fight with his opponent in an open battle than spend so much effort to clean up the mess in the end. The key was that from beginning to end, he had not even seen the appearance of his opponent, which was very hateful. On the Spirit Stream list, Lu Ye of the Jade Blood sect rushed to 9th place. The world was in an uproar. This guy had done it. In the true sense, he had killed his way into the top 10 of the Spirit Stream list with a Heaven 8 cultivation base. This undoubtedly meant that he was among the strongest in the Spirit Stream realm. He was just a Heaven 8. He could still reach the Heaven 9. This was what made people feel terrified. At this point, strictly speaking, Lu Yi only needed to fight one more battle to have the qualifications to challenge first place on the list. However, since he had started to challenge the cultivators of the myriad Devil Ridge one by one, he had chosen not to do so. His next target was the guy in 6th place. He had spent 2 days challenging Ghost Shadow. From beginning to end, Lu Yi had not used a single blade. In the end, although Ghost Shadow had voluntarily admitted defeat, he had not been able to vent his fighting spirit, which was somewhat depressing. Therefore, he had sharpened his blade, preparing to start with the guy in 6th place. He had issued a challenge, and his opponent had accepted it. When his opponent had chosen a location, Heaven's secret descended, and Lu Ye's figure disappeared. His field of vision was filled with white light, and the sound of crashing waves could be heard. Even the air was salty and moist. This immediately reminded Lu Yi of the days when he had participated in the Spirit Stream battle with Hua Ci. If his guess was correct, his opponent should have chosen a location on the sea. His field of vision recovered, and he looked around. Sure enough, he was indeed on the sea. Lu Ye's current location was on an island on the sea. The island was very small, only about 100 feet in radius. Several hundred feet away, there was another similar island. The two islands were about the same size and looked like twin islands. On the opposite island stood a man in his early 20s in loose robes. He was not very handsome, but his expression was very determined. This person was most likely a dermic cultivator, and a water dermic cultivator at that. That was why he had deliberately chosen such a battlefield. Everyone knew that Lu Ye of the Jade Blood sect was a weapon cultivator who cultivated a fire attribute cultivation method. In such a battlefield, a water dermic cultivator's advantage was too great. On the other hand, such an environment was also very suppressive to a weapon cultivator with a fire attribute cultivation method. If Lu Yi wanted to get close, he would have to leap several hundred feet into the sea and kill his way to his opponent's island. However, in midair, no matter how nimble he would be nothing more than a target. If he did not think of a way to charge over, he would also become a target. In any case, this dermic cultivator had the advantage. He used the challenge's right to choose the battlefield's terrain incisively and vividly. Lu Yi admired him for being able to find such a strange terrain among so many other battlefields. What surprised Lu Yi even more was that the sea was not calm. All kinds of strange sea beasts swam past, leaving behind huge shadows under the water. If one were to be struck down while leaping over the sea, they would die without a doubt. In such an environment, it was very difficult for Yi to get close to her opponent. Lu Yi, the dermic cultivator, stood at the edge of his island and tried to greet Lu Yi. What answered him was 9 rays of light from the weapon cultivator's dermic cultivator. The Dermic cultivator stood on the spot without moving, and his expression did not change. The weapon cultivator's Dermic cultivator stopped less than 10 feet away. After a slight vibration, Lu Yi retrieved it. It was not that Lu Yi did not want to attack his opponent, but that he had reached the limit of his control and had no choice but to retrieve it. Otherwise, it would be like throwing a meat bun at a dog. I've long heard that the Jade Blood Sex Lu Yi's artifact control technique has reached the acme of perfection, and his attack range far exceeds his own realm. Seeing it today, he really lives up to his reputation. That Dharma cultivator was not stingy with his praise. However, fellow Taoist, you don't have to test me. The distance between the two of us is about 900 feet. Your Imperial equipment won't be able to hit me. Although he was calm and composed, he couldn't help but feel a lingering fear. He had tried his best to overestimate the distance of Lu Yi's flying tool, but he didn't expect that he had still underestimated it. Just now, Lu Yi's Imperial equipment would have hit him if he was just a few feet away. As he spoke, a ball of water suddenly appeared in his hand. With a flick of his wrist, the ball of water shot towards Lu Yi like an arrow. While it was still in the air, the ball of water suddenly exploded, sending a rain of tiny water arrows towards Lu Yi's island. Spells are different. Spells have a much longer attack range than Imperial equipment. It was common knowledge that spells had a longer attack range than Imperial artifact. That was why magic cultivators usually didn't need to refine Imperial artifacts to kill their enemies. Spells were enough for them. Then, he saw a fire phoenix spell flying towards him. The magic cultivator immediately urged his spell to meet it. It was still a ball of water, but when it flew into the air, the ball of water would transform into all kinds of spells, be it water arrows, water dragons, or other forms of water beasts. There were all kinds of fancy tricks that dazzled the eyes. It had to be said that there was indeed a reason why this person was ranked 6th. He stood there like a cannon, unleashing one exquisite spell technique after another at an extremely fast speed. Lu Yi didn't spend much effort on magic cultivators, but his spell-casting speed wasn't considered slow. After all, when he received the inheritance of the Fire Phoenix spirit pattern, he witnessed the birth and fall of a 4 symbols sacred beast with his own eyes. His understanding of the Fire Phoenix spell far exceeded that of ordinary magic cultivators. The power of the Fire Phoenix spell he cast now was several times stronger than before. Fire element was explosive, water element was gentle. In terms of the damage of a single spell, the magic cultivator on the other side was not as good as Lu Yi, but in terms of spell casting speed and frequency, Lu Yi was far inferior. After all, the other party was a professional. Moreover, Lu Yi soon discovered a problem. The environment here had a very strong suppression on the Fire Phoenix spell he cast. Compared to the Fire Phoenix spell he usually cast, the power he cast now was as much as 30% weaker. Amazing, truly amazing. That magic cultivator slowly became excited as he exchanged spells with Lu Yi. Fellow Taoist, you're the first person I've ever seen to be able to cast spells to this extent as a weapon cultivator. But it's meaningless to continue like this, fellow Taoist. If you continue like this, you'll lose. Chapter 402. The reason the spell cultivator was so confident was that Lu Yi was at a complete disadvantage in a battle of spells. Lu Yi naturally couldn't gain the upper hand in a battle of amateurs against professionals. At this moment, the area between the two was filled with mist, with water balls hidden in the mist. The Fire Phoenix art had just been used, but its power had dropped sharply by 30%. As it passed through the thick mist, its power dropped further. Before long, it would be blocked and scattered by the spell cultivator's spells. Spells blotted out the sky and covered the earth as they suppressed Lu Yi bit by bit. Even if he activated the Fire Phoenix art with all his might, he couldn't reverse the situation. Fellow Taoist, you don't have to feel aggrieved. This time, I've taken advantage of the terrain. If I meet you in the wild, you'll definitely be able to kill your way to me. At that time, I won't be your match." Although the spell cultivator had the upper hand, his words were very humble and even seemed to be persuading Lu Yi. However, it was obviously abnormal for someone from the Myriad Demon Ridge to persuade someone from the Haotian Alliance. The other party seemed to be advising him out of goodwill, but in fact, he was adding fuel to the fire. His words and actions were urging Lu Yi to think of a way to kill his way to him, as if he could only sit and wait for death if he did. One had to admit that this person understood people's hearts well. With a few simple words, he could incite the anger in the enemy's heart. Now, the two were on two isolated islands about 90 feet apart. If Lu Yi wanted to kill his way to him, he would have to fly over on his spiritual tool. Facing a spell cultivator like this, it wasn't easy to fly over. If he wasn't careful, he might be knocked down. However, the current situation was too unfavorable for Lu Yi. If he didn't fly over, he would lose this battle. Summoning his own flying spirit artifact, Lu Yi leaped onto it and activated his spirit energy. Turning into a streak of light, he plunged headlong into the thick fog. Only his silhouette could be vaguely seen through the fog. Seeing Lu Yi's actions, the spell cultivator's lips curled up in a treacherous expression that said, "Kid, you've been fooled." His hand seals changed, and as more than 10 water balls shot toward Lu Yi, he clasped his hands together and shouted, "Condense!" The thick mist between the two instantly became viscous. Rushing into the mist, Lu Yi immediately felt a sense of sluggishness, and his speed suddenly decreased. So he was waiting for him here. Lu Yi suddenly understood. He had fought with Bailan before, and Bailan had also cultivated water element spells. However, her water element spells had a great corrosive effect on Imperial flying tools, which would greatly reduce their spirituality. Lu Yi had thought that his opponent this time should be very similar to Bailan's methods. As long as his flying tool's spirituality was greatly reduced, his situation in the air would become very bad. Unexpectedly, his spell didn't corrode the spirit tool at all. Instead, it had the ability to slow down the speed of the spirit tool. At this moment, in the thick fog, although Lu Yi did his best to activate the spirit artifact under his feet, he was still as slow as a turtle. At this speed, there was no way he could dodge the enemy's attack. The spell cultivator's killing move came. Balls of water suddenly appeared around Lu Yi's body and surrounded him. Then, the balls of water exploded and turned into a series of exquisite spells, instantly turning the place where Lu Yi was into a zone of death. Either admit defeat or die. What's your choice? The spell cultivator looked at the silhouette in the fog in front of him, feeling very proud. In truth, in terms of true strength, there was no way he could occupy the 6th place on the spirit stream list. Behind him was Yu Lianzhou of the North Profound Sword Sect, who was obviously stronger than him. However, Yu Lianzhou had challenged him before, and in the end, he was in the same situation as Lu Yi. He had no choice but to admit defeat and give up. It could be said that it was because of this special terrain that he was able to occupy the 6th place on the spirit stream list. Furthermore, this fog condensing technique was a spell that he had painstakingly cultivated. It was used in conjunction with the terrain, and was very effective against body cultivators, weapon cultivators, and even ghost cultivators who needed to fight in close quarters. Lu Yi naturally wouldn't admit defeat. As the spell cultivator watched, a dazzling lightning suddenly appeared in the fog. The spell cultivator's expression turned serious. He had never heard of Lu Yi cultivating lightning element spells. Where did this lightning come from? Just as he was thinking about it, a clap of thunder rang out, and a bolt of lightning fell from the sky, directly striking the fog. Lightning summoning talisman? The spell cultivator was shocked, and all the hair on his body stood on end. A great sense of crisis rose in his heart, and he hurriedly retreated until he reached the edge of the island. He waved the fog in front of him away, and activated a spiritual barrier around his body. Only then did he feel a little safer. The existence of the fog greatly increased the power of lightning, and he didn't dare to touch it. He mistakenly thought that Lu Yi had activated some kind of lightning summoning talisman, but in fact Lu Yi didn't have one. This kind of spiritual talisman was expensive, and each one cost at least 100 spirit stones. It was an extremely expensive spiritual talisman. What he had used was just a lightning summoning spiritual pattern. This move was something he had learned from Bailan. When he had fought against Bailan before, she had suddenly used it, and he had been caught off guard. Everywhere that was filled with fog, lightning instantly swam, and electric snakes danced wildly. It was an extremely terrifying sight. Even though the spell cultivator had tried his best to avoid it, he couldn't avoid being slightly affected. For a moment, his body trembled like a sieve, and his hair stood on end. In his field of vision, the figure wrapped in fog fell straight down. Soon, the sound of something falling into the water could be heard from the surface of the sea. The giant beast swimming under the sea boiled, and a bloody mouth suddenly opened, swallowing the thing that fell into its stomach. Dead? The spell cultivator stared fixedly at this scene, almost unable to believe that Lu Yi had died just like that. He didn't die from a spell, but from his own lightning summoning talisman. The spell cultivator suddenly realized a problem. If Lu Yi was really dead, then he should have one. However, there was no feedback from the heavens, which meant that Lu Yi wasn't dead. Just as this thought flashed through his mind, he saw a bright flame rushing over from a position close to the surface of the sea. The flame looked like a pair of wings. He still wanted to activate the fog condensing technique to stop Lu Yi, but lightning was still swimming in the fog. How could he activate it? A piercing pain came from between his brows, and the warning in his heart urged him to leave quickly. Otherwise, it would be too late when the other party got close. I admit defeat. Dharma Xiao was a sensible person and immediately shouted. As soon as he finished speaking, Lu Yi, with a pair of flaming wings, appeared in front of him like a divine soldier descending from the heavens. He slashed his saber at the spell cultivator's neck, and the huge force sent him flying. However, he had already disappeared in midair. His eyes widened with fear. Fortunately, he had shouted in time, or he really would have died. Standing on the other party's island, Lu Yi's eyes were downcast, and the fury in his heart was rising. It was fine that the 9th-ranked ghost Shadow had wasted 2 days of his time. The other party was a ghost cultivator and wouldn't easily make a move unless he was confident, so he had hidden for 2 days. But what the hell was this spell cultivator? He had chosen such a strange terrain and used it to show off his strength. When he came over, he actually admitted defeat. What was this? Lu Yi felt as if he had just punched cotton. This guy was really too disgusting. He had even lost an air transportation spirit artifact. The one that had fallen into the water just now was his broken air transportation spirit artifact. The reason he had let it fall into the water was because he wanted to use it to lower the enemy's guard. In the end, it hadn't worked. Although he now had a large number of air transportation spirit artifacts, he couldn't waste them like this. He had originally planned to use this battle to relieve his stifling killing intent, but now, not only had it not been relieved, it had become even more serious. After leaving the battlefield and returning to the wooden house, Lu Yi rummaged through his storage pouch and found a suitable air transportation spirit artifact. He silently refined it. He didn't know what kind of strange people and strange terrain he would encounter in the next battle, but he couldn't do without an air transportation spirit artifact. Although he now had the flying wing spirit tattoo and could activate it at any time, it consumed much more energy than flying on a spirit artifact. He would try not to use it if possible. On the spirit stream list, the Jade Blood Sex Lu Yi's name was already in 6th place. The myriad Devil Ridges side was silent. Even the experts in the top 10 of the spirit stream list were unable to stop the momentum of this fellow. Of the 9 heavenly lists, The fact that Celestial 8 occupied such a high position caused many of the cultivators in the myriad Devil Ridge to feel ashamed. Shi Guang from the Profound Tao sect had already returned to his own camp and was in the middle of recuperating. He knew that he would soon have a battle with Lu Yi, and before that, he had to adjust himself to his best state. He was the final gatekeeper. If even he was defeated, the entire myriad Devil Ridge would lose face. Even Li Baxian hadn't been able to occupy the first place on the Spirit Stream list with a Heaven 8 cultivation base. How long had Lu Ye been cultivating? What ability did he have to accomplish such a feat? In an instant, the entire Spirit Stream battlefield quieted down. Everyone was paying attention to the changes on the Spirit Stream list. From the current rankings, Lu Ye only needed to defeat the person in third place on the Spirit Stream list to be able to challenge Shi Guang. The person in third place on the Spirit Stream list was a female cultivator from a first-grade sect in the Heaven continent. Inside the wooden house, Lu Yi was refining a flying spiritual tool while replying to messages from many of his friends. They all knew that Lu Yi was about to challenge the person in third place on the Spirit Stream list, so his friends kindly passed him all kinds of information about his opponent. After reading the information, Lu Yi frowned. Strictly speaking, the person in third place was a weapon cultivator, and could be considered a very special small sect. In the entire 9 continents they were rare, even rarer than Yanshi. Was this another disgusting guy? Lu Ye's mentality collapsed. The strength of the person in third place on the Spirit Stream list could be seen from Li Baxian, who had been in third place before. Of course, since the 3 malignant tumors had been removed, the value of the Spirit Stream list had undoubtedly declined greatly. The current person in third place couldn't be compared to Li Baxian. However, Lu Yi would never underestimate her, nor would he show mercy just because she was a woman. During these days of fighting, there were quite a number of female cultivators who had died at his hand. Basically, none of them could survive. Only Bai Lan had managed to escape. Chapter 403. When the experts of the Spirit Stream list were challenged, they would always choose a terrain that was advantageous to them. For example, when Lu Yi had been challenged, he had chosen a small battlefield. He was a weapon cultivator who wanted to fight in close combat, so he naturally didn't want the battlefield to be too large. Therefore, Lu Yi would encounter all kinds of terrains as he fought. Inside the wooden house, Lu Ye's mind connected to the Spirit Stream list, and he chose the female cultivator ranked third and issued a challenge. His opponent agreed, but the battle didn't start immediately. After waiting for 2 hours, the heavens suddenly sent him into the battlefield. Lu Ye's vision slowly recovered, and he immediately looked around. He found that the terrain matched some of the information he had received before. This was a large terrain. There were 2 bare mountains in the small space, both of which were several hundred feet tall. There was no vegetation on the mountains, and they were rugged. The mountains weren't steep and were relatively flat. Lu Yi took out his flying spirit tool and tried to fly. Sure enough, just like the information he had received before, this place prohibited flying. Noticing this, Lu Yi knew that her opponent for this round had chosen a terrain that was extremely advantageous to her. The restricted flying meant that it would be more difficult to search for his opponent. Looking at the 2 mountains on his left and right, Lu Yi didn't know which one his opponent would choose as the vantage point, so he simply stood there and waited. He had already set off to search for traces of his opponent. Not long after, Yi sent him a message that she had found traces of his opponent. Lu Yi immediately rushed to the mountain on his right, and with the support of wind travel, he left behind an afterimage. However, he hadn't climbed more than 300 feet when he heard the sound of something tearing through the air. He dodged to the side, only to feel a gust of wind brush past him, causing his cheek to hurt. Looking up, he saw a tall figure appear on the top of the mountain. The female cultivator was wearing a tight white dress with purple edges, outlining her graceful figure. She had a high ponytail behind her head and was holding a bow in her hand. Her face was cold as she looked down at him condescendingly. This was Lu Ye's opponent, an archer. This was a very small sect, but the smaller the sect, the more difficult it was to deal with. Because it wasn't common, it was inevitable that cultivators didn't have enough experience dealing with it. Lu Ye's opening was undoubtedly not going well in this kind of terrain where flying was prohibited and the opponent had occupied the high ground. If he wanted to defeat his opponent, at the very least, he had to kill his way into the range where he could use Imperial equipment. However, during this entire process, he would definitely be greeted by his opponent's arrows. The difference in height between the two of them should be more than 2,000 feet. It didn't seem like much, but this was only the difference in height. The real distance between them was at least 5,000 feet. The arrows shot by cultivators were not something that mortals could compare with. They were arrows that contained all kinds of inconceivable power. This female cultivator's arrow shot out 500 feet. Although she had the advantage of looking down from above, it also showed that her archery skills were not ordinary. That arrow was probably just a greeting. It was a similar situation to the previous match. Against these long-armed fellows, if you want to kill them, you have to find a way to break into their attack range first. Lu Yi took a light breath and looked at his opponent from several thousand feet away. Then, he lowered his body slightly and activated wind travel between his legs. At the same time, two dents appeared in the ground where he was standing. Dust flew into the air, and his figure quickly rushed forward. Almost at the same time that Lu Yi moved, the female cultivator raised her hand and shot out 3 arrows. These 3 arrows formed the shape of a triangle, sealing off a large area of space. Before the arrows even reached him, Lu Yi felt a piercing pain on his body. His opponent's arrows were clearly specially made. With her special skills and talent in archery, they had extremely strong penetration and killing power. Lu Yi leaped high, dodging the 3 arrows. Before he landed, another arrow appeared in front of him. Before this, he actually didn't notice that his opponent had shot this arrow. He suddenly realized that his opponent had shot 4 arrows, 3 from the front and 1 from the back. The last arrow was the killing move. It was just that this last arrow was perfectly concealed by the first 3 arrows. In midair, there was no way to dodge. He unsheathed his mountain plate saber and slashed at the incoming arrow. With a boom, spiritual power surged. Lu Ye's body was blown back by the huge impact. He had just stabilized himself when several more arrows approached him. His opponent's attacks were endless, without the slightest pause. Moreover, she seemed to be able to predict his next move. Even if Lu Yi could dodge this attack, he would be blocked by the next one. On the mountain, one of them dashed forward with the support of wind travel, while the other's archery was unparalleled. Lu Yi truly experienced the power of this female cultivator. Such a godly archer could play a terrifying role in a large-scale battle. If they were targeted by this woman in a chaotic battle, no spirit stream realm cultivator would be able to survive. What was even more terrifying was that her attack range was far, far greater than that of magic cultivators. Lu Ye's figure continued to advance on the mountain, sometimes retreating, sometimes moving left and right, looking extremely miserable. But in reality, he was constantly closing the distance between them. In just half the time it took to brew a cup of tea, the distance between them had been reduced by half. At this point, the female cultivator's archery skills became even more terrifying. Previously, when the distance was too far, the woman's archery skills were a bit rigid. But as the distance closed, her archery skills became more flexible. She could even control the trajectory of the arrows to a certain extent, making it even more difficult to guard against. He lay dormant in the dark, not making a move. Because Lu Yi was still far away from the woman, if she made a move, it would easily alert the enemy. Only when Lu Yi was close enough to the woman would she explosively attack, ensuring that she could cooperate with Lu Yi to kill the enemy. When the distance closed to about 300 meters, Lu Ye's advance became even more difficult. At this distance, the deterrence of his opponent's archery skills increased explosively. The sound of bowstrings rang out incessantly. The arrows were like a meteor shower falling from the sky, without any pause, flying towards Lu Yi without any pause. On the barren mountain, rocks were flying everywhere and dust was flying everywhere. Behind Lu Yi were craters created by arrows, and his entire body was covered in dust, looking extremely miserable. Until a certain moment, the incessant barrage of attacks suddenly stopped. Lu Yi looked up and saw the female cultivator standing there quietly with her bow in hand. There were still traces of blood dripping from the bowstring, and one of her fingers was so badly mangled that white bones could be seen. The female cultivator's face was as pale as paper. It seemed that she had expended a great deal of energy. After an incense stick's worth of high-intensity attacks, the female cultivator was clearly on the verge of collapse. Compared to her own state, Lu Yi suspected that she had used up all her arrows. In less than an incense stick's worth of time, the female cultivator had shot out at least 800 arrows. Lu Yi had dodged most of them, and the few that he hadn't managed to dodge were blocked by his mountain saber. Lu Yi didn't continue forward, only quietly looking up at the female cultivator. The battlefield imprint was transmitting a message from Yi. Clearly, she was asking Lu Yi if he wanted to fight. Lu Yi slowly shook his head. "You're very strong. Shi Guang is no match for you." After saying this, the female cultivator looked up at the sky. "I admit defeat." Heaven's secret descended and sent her out of the battlefield. Just as Lu Yi had guessed, she had used up all her arrows. It was undeniable that she was very strong, but if she wanted to fully utilize her strength, she had to rely heavily on external objects. Now that she had used up all her arrows, what could she use to fight Lu Yi? The reason why she had made Lu Yi wait for more than an hour after accepting his challenge was to prepare for her arrow to fail. It could be said that she had lost a lot of money in this fight with Lu Yi. After all, each of her arrows had to be specially made, and hundreds of them added up to a considerable amount of wealth. After the female cultivator disappeared, Lu Yi sheathed his saber. He stood there silently for a moment, allowing Heaven's secret to guide him back to the wooden house. "Ah, the third place of the spirit stream list is back. Congratulations!" Hua Xi's teasing voice came from the side. This woman had just returned from cultivating outside and happened to run into Lu Yi. Lu Yi ignored her and sent a message to Lianzhou, asking about Shi Guang's situation. Was he bullied? Hua Xi was surprised. Yi stepped forward and whispered into Hua Xi's ear. Hua Xi immediately understood and smiled. "It's fine as long as you win. Why do you care about the process?" How could Lu Yi not know this? It was just that, what kind of people were in the top 10 of the spirit stream list? Ever since he had challenged Ghost Shadow, none of them had been serious. Ghost Shadow had wasted 2 days with him, but in the end, he hadn't even seen his face. The 6th place magic cultivator had chosen a terrain with 2 isolated islands in the sea. Lu Yi had just charged over when the opponent had admitted defeat. This time, it was even more ridiculous. Lu Yi hadn't even been able to get within 300 meters of the opponent before the battle ended. From beginning to end, he had been the one getting beaten. Although he had won in the end, Lu Yi couldn't feel happy at all. At that moment, Lianzhou replied, "Shi Guang is a magic weapon cultivator. His spirit tool is a spear." Lu Yi let out a long breath. Finally, he wouldn't have to face such a strange opponent. Without any delay, Lu Yi immediately issued a challenge to Shi Guang. Although he wasn't in his best condition, the anger in his heart was about to ignite. He couldn't wait to fight openly with his opponent to relieve the anger in his heart. Shi Guang didn't make him wait for too long. After the challenge was issued, Lu Yi's figure disappeared from the wooden house. Lu Yi and Shi Guang appeared at the same time in a battle arena that was 300 meters wide. They both saw each other's figures at the same time. Lu Yi looked around and found that this battle arena was quite to his liking. When he had been challenged before, He had chosen this type of arena, but it had been smaller. Lu Ye. Shi Guang held a spear in his hand and pointed it forward. He shouted, "Come and die!" Chapter 404. Although there was no personal grudge between them, Shi Guang was Lu Ye's final opponent on the Spirit Stream list, and he was the last face of the Myriad Devil Ridge. The first place on the Spirit Stream list was a symbol and a status. Neither side would easily allow the other to take it. In the past 10 years, the position had been occupied by Feng Yuechan from the Pill Heart sect. That was inevitable, as she had been stuck in the Spirit Stream realm for more than 10 years. Her peers had all reached the Cloud River True Lake realm, but she was still stuck in the Spirit Stream realm. The powerful foundation she had accumulated over the years was not something that could be challenged by some rising stars. Finally, the 3 malignant tumors on the Spirit Stream list were gone, and the Myriad Devil Ridge could finally take first place. But how long had it been? At most, it would only be 2 months. Lu Ye was the only one from Grand Heaven Alliance. He was unstoppable and kept breaking all kinds of records. Now, he even had the qualification to fight for the first place in the ranking. Therefore, Shi Guang could not lose this battle, and he did not dare to lose. If Lu Yi, who was only at the Heaven 8th stage, took first place on the Spirit Stream list, then all of the Myriad Devil Ridge's cultivators would have to lower their heads. In the arena, Lu Yi looked at the figure whose spiritual power was surging, and raised his eyebrows. His opponent's condition was not quite right, as if he had taken some kind of spiritual pill that could temporarily increase his strength. There were such spiritual pills in the cultivation world. Lu Yi had seen a spiritual pill called the Qi Explosion Pill in the secret treasure vault. Within the time it takes for an incense stick to burn, the spiritual power in a cultivator's body would increase by 30 to 40%. As a result, the cultivator's overall strength would increase dramatically. However, spiritual pills that could increase a cultivator's strength for a short period of time often had severe side effects. The greater the effect, the more severe the side effect. Shi Guang had clearly taken something similar to the Qi Explosion Pill before entering the arena. If he couldn't deal with Lu Yi within the time it takes for an incense stick to burn, then he would have no power to fight back. "I'll do it myself," Lu Yi suddenly said softly. These words were directed at Yi. Yi had already entered the ground and was ready to attack at any time. However, Lu Ye's previous battles had been extremely frustrating. This time, he finally met a normal opponent. Although he suspected that his opponent had taken a Qi Explosion Pill, he still didn't want Yi to interfere. On the other side, Shi Guang roared angrily and charged towards Lu Yi like a bolt of lightning. As he charged forward, the long spear in his hand rapidly accumulated power. Lu Yi also charged toward him. In the arena, the distance between them were several tens of meters in the blink of an eye. The mountain saber was unsheathed, and the saber covered in flames, the long spear struck out, as if a sleeping dragon had suddenly poked its head out from its lair. There was a momentary stalemate and an explosion sounded. After the spiritual force was violently compressed, the two figures were both sent flying back. In midair, Lu Yi felt the web between his thumb and forefinger go numb. He hurriedly stabilized himself and grabbed Hu Po, who was crouching on his shoulder, and threw him to the side. He landed on the ground in a sorry state and retreated several tens of meters before stabilizing himself. Regardless of whether or not Shi Guang had taken a spiritual pill to increase his strength, Lu Yi felt like he had encountered a formidable opponent. While fighting with such an enemy, he couldn't spare any attention to protect Hu Po. On the other side, Shi Guang also landed. His feet didn't move, but his body slid back nearly 10 meters. Before he could stabilize himself, a figure flashed in his field of vision. Lu Yi had already arrived in front of him, his sharp saber stabbing toward him. An ordinary person would have dodged such a ferocious attack with all their strength, but Shi Guang simply leaned to the side and thrust his spear at Lu Yi like a dragon. A piercing sound rang out as the two figures crossed each other, blood splattering everywhere. A bloody wound appeared on Lu Ye's waist and abdomen, while Shi Guang's chest was also bleeding. This was destined to be a violent battle. Both sides were attacking with the intention of killing the other. No one had any thoughts of retreating, so they were both injured in just the second exchange. However, Lu Ye's injuries were lighter because the moment his opponent's spear fell, he had constructed a defensive spirit rune. Although it couldn't block the power of the spear, it had dissipated a lot of the force. As if he couldn't feel the pain, Shi Guang spun the spear half a circle in front of him. As his left and right hands alternated, the tip of the spear turned into the end of the spear, and he stabbed behind him. The speed of his change of moves was overwhelming. At this moment, Lu Ye's back was still facing him, and the tip of the spear was aimed at the back of Lu Ye's head. Yi, who was hiding in the dark, almost cried out in alarm. Even Hu Pa hurriedly prepared to save his master. However, it was as though Lu Yi had eyes at the back of his head, as he ducked down and the spear brushed past his scalp. For him to be able to dodge this attack that he hadn't seen, it was undoubtedly because of his strong senses. In that instant, he had felt an intense pain at the back of his head, and a fatal threat had arisen in his heart. Arching his body, he slashed out with his saber. At the same time that his saber landed on Shi Guang's chest, Lu Yi was also sent flying to the ground by Shi Guang's spear. Since Shi Guang's spear had missed, it was pressed down like a whip. Forced back by that saber, Shi Guang lowered his head and looked at his chest. Even though he was wearing a protective treasure armor, he couldn't defend against that sharp saber of his opponent. There were 2 gaping wounds on his chest that were extremely hideous as fresh blood stained his robes. If not for the protection of his treasure armor, those 2 slashes would have taken his life. On the other side, Lu Yi stood up hurriedly as his right cheek twitched uncontrollably. There was even a stick-shaped scar on his face. It was whipped by the body of the spear. That scar stretched from his face all the way to his right abdomen, causing a burning pain. "You're so strong," Shi Guang praised loudly, his words coming from the bottom of his heart. Lu Yi paused for a moment before replying indifferently, "Same here." Although he couldn't wait to smash the other party to the ground and chop him into a few hundred pieces, that didn't affect his joy after being praised like that. The acknowledgement from the opponent was undoubtedly the most genuine. "It's not the same." Shi Guang slowly shook his head. "I've been on the spirit stream list for several months now. Every month, I receive a baptism bestowed by the heavens. Before coming here, I even took a chi eruption pill. That's why I'm able to display strength that far surpasses my original level. But you have nothing. Your cultivation base is even lower than mine." As he spoke, Shi Guang couldn't help but doubt himself. Was there really such a person in this world? His cultivation was higher than the other parties by a small level, and he had been baptized by Tianji several times before, and he had even taken a chi eruption pill. And yet, he was only able to fight to a draw with the other party. If the other party had such accumulation, how strong would he be? If such a person continued to live, it would undoubtedly be a nightmare for the myriad demon ridge. "Are you done?" Lu Yi raised his saber impatiently. "One last sentence." Shi Guang grinned. "Although it's not very glorious, I'm very glad that I took a chi eruption pill before coming in. Otherwise, I wouldn't be your match at all." When the last word fell, the 2 of them pounced at each other at the same time. The death match, just like before, began once again. Saber light and spear shadows, killing intent burst forth. Violent spiritual energy wantonly scattered in this battlefield that had a radius of several hundred feet. From time to time, blood would spurt out, and there would be clanking sounds of collisions that constantly resounded. Neither of them used any artifact manipulation technique. From the very beginning, it was a bloody close-quarters fight. Lu Yi was doing this because he was holding back his anger, while Shi Guang understood that he was no match for Lu Yi in the Tao of artifact manipulation, so he naturally wouldn't embarrass himself. However, as time passed, Lu Ye's strength was clearly increasing. Whether it was his speed or strength, he was much stronger than before. At the same time, Shi Guang's leg swept across Lu Ye's shoulder like a whip. Even though he had activated the defensive spirit rune in advance, Lu Ye was still sent flying by this kick. He fell heavily to the ground and rolled several times before coming to a stop. He quickly got up, blood flowing from the corner of his mouth. His left arm hung limply, unable to exert any strength. It was dislocated. So you also took a spirit pill that could increase your strength in advance. Shi Guang coldly snorted. He had clearly felt the increase in Lu Ye's strength, so he mistakenly thought that Lu Ye was the same as him. However, Lu Ye's increase was visible to the naked eye, so he guessed that the spirit pill Lu Ye had taken should be a relatively mild one, not as violent as the Qi eruption pill. Lu Ye was too lazy to explain. He hadn't taken any spirit pills to increase his strength. He had only constructed a blood-stained spirit rune on his body. He had obtained this spirit rune for a long time, but so far, he had only used it once, and that was during the Battle of Spirit Creek. This was because after obtaining this spiritual inscription, he rarely encountered opponents who were on par with him or who were slightly stronger than him. The purpose of this spirit rune was to absorb Lu Ye's blood and increase his strength. To put it simply, the more injured Lu Ye was, the stronger the effect of this spirit rune. These days, Lu Ye was often chased by a large group of people, so how could he have the chance to use the bloodstained spirit rune? Challenging Shi Guang gave him this opportunity. Biting the mountain saber with his teeth, he took out a bandage from his storage bag and casually wrapped it around his left arm a few times to stabilize his swaying left arm. During this process, Shi Guang naturally wouldn't just watch. Unfortunately, Lu Ye's movements were too fast. By the time he arrived, Lu Ye had already finished. Facing the incoming spear, Lu Ye's long saber dashed forward, breaking through the spear flowers. Sticking close to the spear, he charged towards Shi Guang. Shi Guang's expression changed. He pulled back his spear to block, and the mountain saber descended. A loud sound rang out, and Shi Guang's body lightened as he was sent flying. With the support of the blood-stained spirit rune, the speed and strength of Lu Ye's saber had undergone an earth-shattering change. The originally evenly matched battle had now turned into a one-sided one. Activating wind force, Lu Ye's figure darted out, leaping high into the air and slashing down with his saber. Although this saber was barely blocked by Shi Guang, the huge force still smashed his body down. Lu Ye nimbly spun in midair, and swept out his right leg like a whip. Before Shi Guang could land on the ground, he was sent flying again. Furthermore, this whip leg swept across his head, causing Shi Guang to see stars. Chapter 405. When Lu Ye and Shi Guanggang fought for a while, the latter was slightly stronger. However, Lu Ye could activate all kinds of spirit inscriptions during the battle, especially the defensive spirit inscriptions, which helped him block a few fatal threats. That was why the two sides could fight so fiercely. But as time passed, the blood-stained spirit tattoos gradually took effect, and Lu Ye's strength increased bit by bit, slowly surpassing Shi Guang. The blood-stained spirit tattoos continued to take effect, and Lu Ye's strength continued to increase. At this point, Shi Guang was at a disadvantage every time they fought. Shi Guang was furious. Although swallowing a Qi explosion pill could increase a cultivator's strength for a short time, it had very strong aftereffects. Moreover, when the Qi explosion pill took effect, the cultivator's mind would also be affected, making them more prone to anger. Under normal circumstances, Shi Guang should have noticed the growing gap in strength between him and Lu Ye, but now he was completely blinded by anger. There was only one thought in his mind, and that was to kill this opponent in front of him. Climbing up from the ground, Shi Guang turned his head and spat out a mouthful of blood. He narrowed his swollen eyes and looked at Lu Ye, who was rushing towards him. He raised the spear in his hand slightly and assumed an extremely strange posture. The next moment, all his spirit energy poured into the spear like a flood. Lu Yi, who was rushing forward, felt all the hair on his body stand on end. A strong sense of danger grew in his heart, and he immediately understood that Shi Guang was about to use some powerful secret technique. After a brief consideration, Lu Yi did not retreat. He also urged his spirit energy to pour into the mountain pan saber, and the long saber, which was already wrapped in flames, burned completely. Boom, the eruption of spirit energy from both sides caused the space in the entire battlefield to distort, and countless cyclones of various sizes swam around. Hu Po was forced to the edge of the battlefield by the violent power. His small body was pressed against the ground, and he did not move. The two figures rushed at each other at an extremely fast speed. Shi Guang pulled out his spear and shouted, "Prairie fire!" A spear shadow appeared in Lu Ye's field of vision, but the spear shadow was like a prairie fire, quickly spreading out. In an instant, Lu Ye's field of vision was filled with countless spear shadows. He didn't care. Instead, he used all his strength to slash down with his burning saber. The spear shadows that filled the sky were shattered into nothingness. The Pan Mountain blade felt as if it had cut through flesh. At the same time, Lu Yi felt a chill in his chest. The tide of spiritual energy slowly subsided, and the two people in the field were still in a deadlock. As far as the eye could see, Lu Ye's Pan Shan saber had struck Shi Guang's shoulder blade, almost decapitating him. Meanwhile, Shi Guang's spear had pierced through Lu Ye's chest and exited from his back. Tick-tock, fresh blood dripped down, making a clear sound. The two of them stared at each other with bloodshot eyes, and then simultaneously raised their legs to kick each other. With a loud bang, both of them were knocked off balance by the recoil and staggered backwards. Lu Ye's chest was bleeding profusely, while Shi Guang's neck was also spurting blood like a fountain. Ding! Lu Ye's long saber stabbed into the ground, but Shi Guang couldn't hold on any longer. With a plop, he fell to the ground, his aura weakening at a speed visible to the naked eye. The time limit of the Qi eruption pill was up. The powerful recoil caused his expression to contort, and an indescribable pain swept through his body. At this moment, he no longer had the strength to continue fighting. Lu Yi gasped for breath, barely managing to stand up, and walked step by step towards Shi Guang. Shi Guang's swollen eyes were fixed on the sky above the battlefield, his thoughts unknown. It wasn't until he heard Lu Ye's movements that his lips moved, about to speak. "Roar!" Hu Po roared. However, this didn't stop Shi Guang. Since he already knew Hu Po's ability, how could Shi Guang not have taken precautions before entering? Under the impact of Hu Po's howl, Shi Guang's body was suddenly enveloped by an invisible barrier, isolating him from the impact of the howl. "I admit defeat." Shi Guang spat out these two words, his entire body completely relaxed, as if a heavy burden had been lifted from his shoulders. Shi Guang's silhouette vanished without a trace. Lu Yi stopped in his tracks. Yi revealed herself and hurriedly supported him. Looking at the wound on Lu Ye's chest, her face was filled with lingering fear. If that spear had been slightly off target, Lu Yi would have died. In fact, Shi Guang's spear had indeed been aimed at Lu Ye's heart, but Lu Yi had avoided it at the critical moment. After a short while, Lu Yi was lying on the bed in the wooden hut. Hua Si was sitting on the edge of the bed, her hands surging with pure wood-type spiritual energy to treat his injuries. Before Hua Si could finish treating him, Lu Yi had already fallen into a deep sleep. It was undeniable that the battle with Shi Guang was the most satisfying battle he had had since challenging the Spirit Stream list. The anger that had accumulated in his heart due to Ghost Shadow and the others had been completely vented. Although his opponent's methods weren't too honorable, as he had taken the Qi eruption pill in advance, they were still enemies. Naturally, he would do anything to win. Who cared about honorable or not? Lu Yi didn't want to think about anything else. He just wanted to have a good sleep. While he was sleeping, The cultivators of the two camps on the Spirit Stream battlefield had completely different attitude. The change in the Spirit Stream list was immediately noticed by the cultivators. When the first and third positions were exchanged, the cultivators of the Grand Heaven Alliance were all overjoyed. Their spirits were lifted and they felt honored. On the other hand, the cultivators of the Myriad Devil Ridge were deathly silent. Their hearts were filled with gloom. The thing they were most worried about had finally happened. Lu Ye of the Jade Blood sect had defeated Shi Guang with his Heaven 8 cultivation base and reached the Spirit Stream list. Such a feat had broken all the records of the 9 continents cultivation world over the years. Before this, there had never been a precedent of a Heaven 8 cultivator occupying the Spirit Stream list. Take Li Baxian for example. He had been in the Spirit Stream stage for more than 10 years, but had only occupied the top 10. Later, after his battle with Yan Xing and revealing his true strength, he had only reached 3rd place. Although the Spirit Stream list's value had decreased greatly after the 3 malignant names had disappeared, the 1st place was still the 1st place. Among the 100 people on the Spirit Stream list, only a Heaven 8 cultivator was at the top, while the rest were all Heaven 9 cultivators. This was a scene that was destined to be recorded in the annals of history. Furthermore, when Lu Ye had first entered the Spirit Stream list, he had been ranked 33rd with his Heaven 7 cultivation base. This was also something that had never happened before. Apart from him, no one had ever entered the Spirit Stream list with a Heaven 7 cultivation base, let alone being ranked so high. Cultivation base aside, the speed at which he had climbed the list was astonishing. Since he had started to focus on the list, less than half a month had passed. During this time, he had spent 5 days competing with Bai Lan and the other cultivators from the Myriad Devil Ridge who had challenged him. In other words, he had only spent about 10 days on the list. In 10 days, he had been invincible all the way to the 1st place of the Spirit Stream list. This was simply shocking. The cultivators from the Myriad Devil Ridge felt bitter. Was the era of being dominated by one person about to come again? Previously, when this guy had been in the inner circle, he had caused the people of the Myriad Devil Ridge to panic. However, at that time, he had only relied on his own attainments in the Tao of Formations to form the Grand Heaven Alliance. Now, he was relying on his true strength. The two types of threats were completely different. There was no doubt that the current Lu Ye was more terrifying than when he had been in the inner circle. The only thing that the Myriad Devil Ridge could rejoice about was the news from Shi Guang that Lu Yi had been seriously injured in the last battle. He would need a long time to recuperate. Therefore, the Myriad Devil Ridge did not have to worry about him jumping out and causing trouble in the short term. Under normal circumstances, the Myriad Devil Ridge could take this opportunity to challenge Lu Yi and pull him down from the 1st place of the Spirit Stream list. However, looking at the current Spirit Stream list, only 2 of the top 6 were from the Myriad Devil Ridge. One was Shi Guang and the other was the female archer. Only the 2 of them were qualified to challenge Lu Yi. Shi Guang was seriously injured, and with the after-effects of the explosive pill, he would be bedridden for at least half a month. It would be good enough if he could maintain his ranking. How could he have the strength to challenge Lu Yi? As for the female archer, she had used up all her arrows. If she wanted to replenish them, it would take a few days. A few days was enough for Lu Yi to recover. Therefore, unless someone from the Grand Heaven Alliance challenged Lu Ye's position on the list would be unshakable. Naturally, the people from the Grand Heaven Alliance were not stupid enough to do something that would make their enemies happy. However, the Myriad Devil Ridge was indeed planning to do so. After Lu Yi reached the top of the Spirit Stream list, the cultivators from the Grand Heaven Alliance in the top 6 were constantly challenged by the cultivators from the Myriad Devil Ridge. The Myriad Devil Ridge clearly wanted to use these people's rankings as a springboard to challenge Lu Yi. As long as they could defeat these cultivators from the Grand Heaven Alliance and replace their positions, they would be qualified to challenge Lu Yi. Once they could challenge Lu Yi, given his current condition, there was a high chance that he would not be able to win. Inside the wooden house, Lu Yi woke up with a clear pain in his chest and left arm. He did not have much strength in his body. He slowly got up and yawned. Yi was standing guard beside him. When she heard the noise, she quickly stood up and placed a pillow behind Lu Yi. She asked with concern, "How do you feel?" "I'm fine." Lu Yi rubbed his stomach. "I'm a little hungry. Can I get something to eat?" He smelled a fragrance coming from outside the window. Unsurprisingly, it was Hua Si cooking. Everyone from the Jade Blood sect seemed to have this advantage. All of them were good at cooking. Second senior sister was like this, fourth senior brother was like this, and Hua Si was also like this. "Wait a minute." Yi floated out of the window. After a while, she came back with a bowl of porridge. He did not know what was in the porridge, but it looked very colorful. Lu Yi drank the porridge while checking the various messages in his battlefield imprint. He chose to reply to some of them. Most of them were congratulatory messages. Lu Ye's cultivation was at the 8th heaven, so he had suppressed everyone and occupied the top spot of the spirit stream list. Naturally, it was worth celebrating. Chapter 406. There were also some messages that invited him to cultivate in their sections. They weren't trying to curry favor with Lu Yi. Lu Yi was now in a lot of trouble, especially now that he was first on the spirit stream list. The Myriad Demon Ridge was even more determined to kill him. No matter which sect he went to cultivate in, he wouldn't bring much benefit to them. The only possibility was that he would be targeted by the Myriad Demon Ridge. Lu Yi naturally refused all of these invitations. The 10,000 Poison Forest was the best place for him to hide. As long as he didn't show himself, the people from the Myriad Devil Ridge wouldn't be able to find him. He could take the initiative to attack at any time and catch the Myriad Devil Ridge off guard. Although the world energy here wasn't too rich, as long as Lu Yi had enough spirit pills, his cultivation speed wouldn't be too slow. After ending the message, Lu Yi focused on eating his porridge. Hua Si came every day to treat his injuries. In just 3 days, Lu Ye's injuries were mostly healed. In his spare time, he cultivated and read. His days suddenly became leisurely, without all the previous disturbances. Lu Yi was surprised to find that he was quite comfortable with this kind of life, and even liked it. It wasn't until now that he realized that deep down, he wasn't someone who liked to cause trouble. Compared to that kind of thrilling life, he preferred peace and quiet. It was just that people in Jianghu had no choice. In the small courtyard outside the wooden house, Lu Yi held the mountain pan saber. The spirit chi around him surged and crazily poured into the saber. Some time ago, he was invincible in the spirit stream list, but in the battle with Shi Guang, he found that he was facing a problem. He lacked a way to make the final decision. It could also be said that it was a trump card. The Fire Phoenix Spirit Tattoo was one of them, but it was difficult for him to activate it with his current strength. Last time, he had been able to activate it because he had made a lot of preparations in advance. Moreover, the aftereffects of activating the Fire Phoenix Spirit Tattoo were too great. At that time, he had been lying in bed for many days under Hua Si's care. What he needed now was a trump card that he could withstand and use. Shi Guang's last spear strike had given him a lot of inspiration. He also remembered the scene when he went to the Pill Heart sect and fought with a Heavenly Nine-Sword cultivator. From beginning to end, his opponent had only used one sword strike, but that sword strike contained all of his strength. It was similar to Shi Guang's last spear strike, which was a blow that contained a large amount of spirit chi. This method was not difficult to use. At the last moment of his battle with Shi Guang, Lu Yi had actually grasped the essence of this technique, which was why he had been able to block his opponent's blazing spear. What he needed to do now was to familiarize himself with this technique and perfect it so that he could use it at any time when facing an enemy. Flames blazed as the saber burned. The Mount Pan saber hummed as Lu Yi slashed down. The space in front of him seemed to be torn apart, and a crack appeared on the ground. He did not activate the sharpness spirit tattoo, but the power of this strike was much greater than before. Lu Yi frowned. He was not very satisfied with this strike, because it consumed a lot of spirit chi and physical strength. Moreover, his right arm felt a little sore after this strike. He could at most make 3 strikes in a short period of time before his right arm could not be raised. If this happened in a battle with a strong opponent, he would not be far from defeat. Although he was not satisfied, he had just started cultivating and there were many areas that could be improved. This was a technique and a saber technique. Since it was a saber technique, it should have its own name. How to name it was a problem, Lu Yi muttered to himself. He recalled the flash of sharpness when the saber fell and an idea came to him. Let's call it Flash. There was no shortcut to practicing saber techniques other than perseverance and diligence. In the small courtyard, Lu Yi would occasionally pick up the mountain saber to practice. Then, he would take some spirit pills to recover. When the soreness in his right arm disappeared, he would continue practicing. Although doing so would slow down his cultivation progress, for Lu Yi, the level of his cultivation base was never the most important thing. The fact that he had been able to reach the top of the spirit stream list with his Heaven 8 cultivation base had undoubtedly proved that point. If he could cultivate the flash to the point where he could use it as he wished, then slowing down his cultivation speed would be worth it. Days passed, and Lu Yi gradually became more and more familiar with the flash. However, he was still unable to solve the problem of the consumption of his saber technique. Such an imperfect saber technique would be very difficult to use against strong opponent. Lu Yi never thought that he would have no opponents after reaching first place on the spirit stream list. He would also advance to the Cloud River battlefield. The situation in the Cloud River battlefield was much more complicated than the Spirit Stream battlefield. Even if he could do as he pleased in the Spirit Stream battlefield, he would still have to be careful in the Cloud River battlefield. Over the past few days, several experts from the Grand Heaven Alliance had been steadily maintaining their rankings on the Spirit Stream list. Aside from Shi Guang, who had taken second place on the Spirit Stream list, only the female archer had moved to 4th place. The rankings of the others had not changed much. As for Lu Yi, no one had come to challenge him. Whether it was Shi Guang or the female archer, they all knew that they were no match for Lu Yi. Naturally, they would not come looking for trouble. Half a month later, Lu Yi had opened 320 apertures. It had been 40 days since he had reached Heaven 8. Previously, he had been busy trying to reach the Spirit Stream list, so he had not had much time to cultivate. Recently, he had been practicing saber techniques, which had slowed down his cultivation speed. So, despite so many days, he had only opened 20 apertures. He was still 40 apertures away from reaching Heaven 9. Lu Yi, who was practicing saber techniques in the small courtyard, suddenly stopped and looked up at the sky. Heaven's will had descended. It had been 30 days since he had re-entered the Spirit Stream list. It was time for the heavenly will to reward him. Over the past few days, he had not left the wooden house. It could be said that he had been waiting for this day to come. Regarding the Spirit Stream list experts being rewarded by the heavenly will, he had asked many people to inquire about the situation. So, even if it was his first time experiencing it, he knew what would happen next. Now, he was only worried about one thing, and that was whether or not Hu Po and Yi would be rewarded with him. However, when he thought about it carefully, Hu Po was his pet beast, which was recognized by the heavenly will. Yi was also Hu Po's nightmare spirit. When he had challenged the Spirit Stream list, the two of them had participated in every battle. Now that it was time for the rewards, they should not be left behind. Just as he was thinking about it, Yi and Hu Po ran out of the wooden house. Lu Yi, I feel like I've sensed something. Hu Po too. Yi felt something for the first time, so she could not help but feel a little confused. Just don't resist, Lu Yi said. Hua Xiai heard the commotion and came out. Their eyes met and she quickly understood. It's time. Lu Yi nodded. After saying that, Lu Yi, Hu Po and Yi Yi's figures quickly faded away and disappeared. In a misty area, the three figures that had disappeared suddenly reappeared. This was the place where the heavenly will rewards were given out, the heavenly will pool. The mist in the pool was not spiritual qi of heaven and earth, but a type of energy that was extremely useful to cultivators. Absorbing and refining the mist could not only temper a cultivator's body, but also increase the strength of a cultivator's soul. It could also purify the accumulated pill toxins in the body and increase the purity of one's spiritual power. There were many other benefits. Every expert on the spirit stream list who could stay on the list for a month would be drawn here by the heavenly will, where they would receive the baptism of the heavenly will rewards and become even more powerful. That was why, when Lu Yi had challenged Shi Guang, he had said that he had already received the baptism of the heavenly will rewards several times. After all, Shi Guang had already been on the spirit stream list for several months. Depending on the ranking of the spirit stream list, the amount of time a cultivator could stay in the pool was also different. The higher the ranking, the longer the amount of time a cultivator could stay in the pool. Lu Yi had asked Yu Lianzhou about it, and found that he could only stay in the heavenly will pool for the time it takes an incense stick to burn. Once the time limit was up, he would be teleported back to his original location. As for the first place on the list, Yu Lianzhou wasn't too sure. Lu Yi had asked his second senior sister to ask Feng Yuechan about it. According to her, the few times she had come to the heavenly will pool, she had never stayed for more than an hour. That was also the reason why the experts on the spirit stream battlefield were so obsessed with the spirit stream list. Being on the list not only gave you fame, but also real benefits. The spiritual mist here could temper the body, strengthen the soul, and increase the purity of spiritual power. Which one of those aspects did not affect a cultivator's future and strength? It could be said that being baptized in the heavenly will pool would make one's future prospects even greater. The higher one's ranking was on the spirit stream list, the longer one could stay in the heavenly will pool. That was a phenomenon. The strong would become even stronger. Perhaps that was the tacit encouragement of the heavenly will, which concentrated more of the rewards on the people with the most outstanding talent. The heavenly 9 cultivators had clearly cultivated to the limit of the spirit stream stage, so why didn't they choose to break through to the Cloud River stage? Lu Yi had assumed that the heavenly 9 cultivators wanted to settle down in the spirit stream stage for a while to strengthen their foundations. Now, however, it seemed that there was nothing wrong with that idea. It was just that it was not comprehensive enough. The heavenly 9 cultivators all longed to enter the spirit stream list and gain a place there. How could relying on their own strength compare to the baptism bestowed by the heavenly will? That was why the heavenly 9 cultivators were not in a hurry to break through to the Cloud River stage. Instead, they were all staring at the spirit stream list. However, there was a limit to the baptism. Everyone's situation was different. When the baptism bestowed by the heavenly will did not have much of an effect on the spirit stream list, they would naturally choose to break through to the Cloud River stage to avoid wasting their time. Generally speaking, cultivators who qualified to enter the heavenly will pool would reach their limit after 3 or 4 times. Even if they had the opportunity to enter again, refining the spiritual mist would not benefit them much. In the past, there had been rumors that Feng Yuechan, Li Baxian, and Yan Xing, the 3 malignant tumors, had occupied the spirit stream list for too long, and had been disliked by the heavenly will. Therefore, after the first few times, the monthly baptisms were not given to them. In truth, it was not that the heavenly will disliked them, but rather that the spiritual mist had no effect on them. That was why the heavenly will not lead them here. Within the heavenly will pool, Lu Yi turned to look around and found Hu Po and Yi by his side. Chapter 407. Without needing Lu Ye's instructions, Yi immediately entered a state of meditation. The light on her body flickered, and as the light changed, the surrounding spirit mist continuously poured into her body. Hupo was even more direct. He revealed his true form, opened his bloody mouth, and sucked in. The spirit mist visible to the naked eye turned into a stream of air and was sucked into his stomach. Although it was the first time they were drawn here by Heaven's secret, they all knew that time was limited. Even if Lu Yi was ranked first, he wouldn't stay here for more than an hour. Moreover, this was an opportunity that only came once a month, so they naturally had to cherish it. Lu Yi began to construct spirit-gathering runes in his spiritual cavities. He had experienced something similar twice before. The first time was in the 100-Peak Mountains Dragon Spring, and the second time was in the Immortal Essence City's soul-cleansing pool. In such an environment, his method could be used to great effect. With Lu Ye's speed and concentration in constructing spiritual tattoos, it only took him a moment to complete all 320 small spirit-gathering funnels. He didn't need to worry about what would happen next. These small funnels would naturally draw the surrounding spirit mist into Lu Ye's body and transform it through his own spirit energy. A warm feeling flowed through his body. The effects of the spirit mist here were indeed extraordinary. Lu Yi could feel his body and mind gradually growing stronger. However, if he really wanted to compare, the spirit mist here couldn't compare to directly devouring the blood veins in the scale armor. In terms of strengthening the mind and soul, it couldn't compare to the Immortal Essence City's soul-cleansing pool. As for increasing the purity of his spirit energy, Lu Yi couldn't feel it, because his spirit energy had always been pure and flawless. Overall, the spirit mist of this Heaven's secret pool was like a weakened version of the combination of the Dragon Spring and the soul-cleansing pool. However, this didn't mean that it was useless to Lu Yi. On the contrary, it was very useful, because devouring the blood veins in the scale armor was a very violent process. Lu Yi didn't dare to directly devour them in the beginning. Every time Hupa devoured them, he would be like a corpse for a while. Only when the man and tiger grew stronger could they bear it. Moreover, the blood veins in the scale armor had been completely depleted. In the past, Lu Yi had thought that the scale armor contained an abundance of blood veins, but as he and Hupa continued to use it, and later used it on the giant armor, the scale armor had completely lost its function. The scale armor was now just a simple decoration. The spirit mist of the Heaven Fate Pond was a very gentle enhancement to one's physique and mind. It wouldn't make one feel uncomfortable. Immersing oneself in it, one's entire body would relax, and one might even feel like sleeping. After constructing small spirit-gathering funnels in his spiritual cavities, Lu Yi took out several formation flags and scattered them in all directions, setting up a spirit-gathering formation in the middle of the Heavenly Fate Pond to increase the speed of gathering spiritual fog. The effect was obvious. The mist in the pool became thicker. He still hadn't stopped. With his experience in the Immortal Essence City's soul-cleansing pool, he really wanted to know if he could do something similar and condense the spiritual fog here into liquid and bring it out. It should be possible to observe the density of the spiritual mist in the pool. Lu Yi hurriedly activated his spirit energy and constructed a huge spirit-gathering rune. He then controlled it to turn it into a large funnel. Everything went smoothly. The dense spiritual fog was drawn over and gathered in the funnel. It then clung to the walls of the funnel, condensed into liquid, and flowed out from the bottom of the funnel. Lu Yi took out a jade bottle and placed it at the funnel, ready to collect the dripping spiritual liquid. However, at this moment, an invisible force swept over and destroyed the large funnel in an instant. Lu Yi frowned. Unwilling to give up, he activated his spirit energy to construct another large funnel. This time, as soon as the large funnel was formed, the invisible force appeared again and destroyed the funnel. Not only that, but Lu Yi also had a feeling that he was being watched. It was as if a pair of eyes were staring at him in the dark. If he did anything wrong, there would definitely be some unpleasant consequences. Was this the heavenly fate? Lu Ye's heart trembled. Ever since he embarked on the path of cultivation, he often heard the term heavenly fate. The daily cultivation life of a cultivator was inseparable from the heavenly fate. He had always thought that the so-called heavenly fate was just some strange rules or laws that were above all living things. However, now it seemed that he was wrong. This heavenly fate was alive? His body became somewhat stiff, and the feeling of impending doom was very bad. Lu Yi activated his spirit energy and tried to construct a large spiritual funnel. However, as soon as it took shape, he felt an indescribable panic in his heart. Inside his chest, his heart thumped as if it was going to jump out of his throat. After dispersing his spirit energy, the panic disappeared. Lu Yi immediately confirmed that the heavenly fate did not allow him to bring the spiritual fog out. That was why it had warned him. Was it necessary? However, after thinking about it, the spiritual fog was a reward given by the heavenly fate to the experts on the spirit stream list. Only those who had been on the list for a month were qualified to be drawn here. If he brought the spiritual fog out, what kind of reward would it be? It was like going to a banquet. Being able to eat as much as you wanted was a skill, but taking it away was not right. Realizing this, Lu Yi gave up on his previous idea. Although it was a pity, since the heavenly fate did not allow it, there was nothing he could do. He could not fight the heavenly fate with his wits and courage. In the end, he would be the one to suffer. What he was most concerned about was whether or not the heavenly fate had its own consciousness. Or, was it really a living thing? Suppressing the doubts in his heart, Lu Yi found a place to sit down and wait. Other people cultivated by concealing their spirit and qi, concentrating their mind without any distracting thoughts. After all, if they were not focused enough, they would not be able to absorb the spiritual qi of heaven and earth. However, Lu Yi cultivated by himself. As long as the small spiritual funnel was still there, he did not need to worry. As he silently comprehended, his body and mind continued to grow stronger. Lu Yi had never felt time pass so quickly. His vision blurred, and the environment he was in changed from the heavenly fate pond to the small wooden house. Only then did Lu Yi realize that an hour had already passed. Checking his body, Lu Yi found that even though his body and mind were already strong enough, staying in the heavenly fate pond for an hour had greatly increased his strength. Conservatively speaking, his body and mind had increased by at least 10%. This kind of increase did not seem like much, only 10%, but it was actually very terrifying. Because Lu Ye's foundation was already very strong, an increase of 10% on top of his already strong foundation would naturally bring about a great increase in strength. Other things aside, if he were to fight with Shi Guang now, he was confident that he could defeat him without getting injured. Of course, this was related to the methods he used. Others who entered focused on absorbing spiritual qi, so no matter how talented they were, their efficiency would not be very high. But he was different. Not only did he have more than 300 small funnel spirit patterns to strengthen his spiritual cavities, he also set up a spiritual qi gathering formation. Not only did he obtain enough benefits from inside, even Yi and Hu Po benefited from it. Lu Yi, you seem to have turned white? Yi seemed to have discovered a new continent and looked at Lu Yi with interest. Nonsense. Lu Ye's face darkened, and he raised his hand to pinch Yi's face. Yes, it feels better than before. Lu Yi suspected that if she continued to cultivate like this, Yi would become no different from a living person. Although she looked no different from other people, she was still just a spirit body. Being pinched by Lu Yi, Yi could not break free and could only cry for help. Big sister Hua Xi, save me! Hearing the commotion, Hua Xi walked out of the room and slapped Lu Ye's hand away. She then shielded Yi behind her. Why are you always bullying children? Yi poked her head out from behind Hua Xi and stuck out her tongue at Lu Yi, looking pleased that someone was protecting her. She then said to Hua Xi, Big sister Hua Xi, I said that Lu Yi had turned white, but he didn't believe me. Do you think so? Hua Si looked at Lu Yi seriously, and under his nervous gaze, she said, his qi and blood have become much more vigorous, and his face is glowing. It looks like he's pregnant. She then looked at Hu Po. Hu Po too. Is the heavenly blessings effect so obvious? If it wasn't obvious, why would those heavenly 9 cultivators still remain in the spirit stream battlefield? That's why you should go try for the spirit stream rankings. I can defeat you and take first place? Lu Yi suddenly realized. You're quite ambitious. But if you want to defeat me, I'm afraid you'll never have the chance. With the innate skill tree, he was immune to all poisons. Hua Si's strongest move was useless against him, so she naturally couldn't defeat him. Only now did Lu Yi understand why Hua Si didn't try for the spirit stream rankings. It was because he was currently at the top of the spirit stream rankings. This woman's heart was as big as her chest, and she was aiming for first place. If that was the case, then she would definitely try for the spirit stream rankings after he advanced to the Cloud River realm. Thinking about that scene, Lu Yi felt sad for the myriad Devil Ridge cultivators. Now that he had occupied the top spot of the spirit stream ranking with his 8th heaven cultivation base, he had already humiliated the myriad Devil Ridge cultivators. If Hua Si were to occupy the top spot of the spirit stream ranking as a medical cultivator, not only would the myriad Devil Ridge cultivators be humiliated, but the Grand Heaven Alliance would also be humiliated, since when did a medical cultivator appear in the top 50 of the spirit stream rankings? Lu Yi didn't doubt Hua Si's ability to take first place on the spirit stream rankings. The current Hua Si had the qualifications to challenge the top 30. His body and mind had both been strengthened, so he needed some time to get used to it. After Hua Si and Yi left, Lu Yi simply took out the mountain plate saber and practiced his flash saber technique. After just one swing, Lu Yi felt a difference. Not only had the power of the saber increased, but more importantly, his chest didn't hurt anymore. His chest had been pierced by Shi Guang's spear. Although he had recovered quickly under Hua Si's treatment, her current cultivation was still low. Even if she went all out, there would still be some hidden dangers left in Lu Ye's wound. Previously, every time he practiced the flash saber technique, his chest would hurt a little.